Sorry. Just need to adjust my mic.
Oh shit, playing some Witcher 1, are we? Alright, well if that's the case.
His name was Geralt of Rivia. He was a witcher, a professional monster slayer.
Jacob, I think your music is coming in through your mic.
The monarch's daughter. It was enough to spend the night.
Like, are you playing with your speakers or a headset right now?
Till dawn. If only she were not a deadly beast, a striga, the traitor responsible for the curse.
Yeah, but I guess also when you are talking, it is audible in the background. Yeah, it's like little snippets are coming in. Like, am I the only one hearing this, or?
No, I hear it too.
I hear it, yeah.
Yeah, you're probably better off with headphones for this one. See, he's taking care of the Witcher self-insert right off the bat, instead of needing to lead up to it and drop it as a surprise, you know?
Oh yeah, we're getting straight to the point here.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in that case, if we're talking about atmosphere, I'm going to play the game that I think is just dripping with atmosphere, Darkest Dungeon.
Oh.
Yeah, that's got a
Yes.
pretty thick atmosphere.
You know what I'm saying?
Okay. All right. Is everybody ready? Set up? Or do you still need a minute?
I think I'm good.
I'm good.
I'm good too.
All
Whenever
right.
You guys are ready.
Cool. Oh my god. How do I play The Witcher 1 again? Okay. Well then.
Oh, damn, that's a interesting viewpoint.
Yeah, well, there's two. I don't know why it's set to this one because I never played this one. Yeah, camera mode. Over the shoulder.
Crazy.
There we go. That's more like it. Because yeah, it's got like isometric viewpoints. You can play around with and plays differently. Man, maybe I shouldn't jump into a save 75% into the game.
Well, I mean, if it's in the middle, it doesn't have to be in the beginning either.
No.
I find the beginning's a little slow in
Yeah,
Witcher 1.
it is. Yeah, I'll figure it out. It's just eye candy right now, anyways. How do I play this game again? Okay, that's
Oh, I love this part. These fields, a lot of good memories from this part.
Yeah, this is, this is the moment where, or the chapter of the game where the Witcher becomes something more, at least for me, It's, honestly, this chapter is like up there with anything any of the other games did as well for me. For atmosphere, story, choice, everything. It was great.
I even like the music on these fields in particular.
Yeah. And the whole game has got a banger of a soundtrack, but these fields in particular, yeah.
It's like a haunting kind of that. Speaking of atmosphere, I think those fields have a very powerful atmosphere.
Yeah. I'm not here by accident. Oh shit, something's attacking me. How do I combat again? Oh god. There we go. That's right. It's a click thing. There we go. All right. Well, now that I'm gonna die. So what difficulty am I on? Probably on hard. Game options. Where's the difficulty? Or is it one of those things I have to pick at the beginning and I can't know? Maybe it's in advanced. No, whatever. I'm gonna die. No, run away. Okay, so welcome.
Jacob's favorite game, everybody.
Yeah. Welcome to another episode of Just Your Average Gaming Podcast. I believe we are on episode 12 now, somehow. Feels like it was just yesterday. We were talking about Cyberpunk.
I know, man.
Ooh.
But now...
We grew up so fast.
yeah. Now it's 11 episodes later, and we're going to talk about atmosphere in video games. Which, at least, for me, and I think for a lot of people, is one of the more important aspects of video games, at least in regards to creating immersion and really helping you get lost in a world. So, before we jump in, though, since I just gave a very quick description, let's dive into some more detailed descriptions of what atmosphere in a game means to you. And Julian, you can start us off.
Alrighty. So atmosphere in a game I think it's something that's a bit underlooked by the general gaming community. Like, it's something that everybody uses as a term. When you play a game, you sense it usually when especially when it's present and powerful and something you enjoy. You say, oh yeah, the atmosphere was good. Maybe it's not something that you tangibly tear apart and analyze on an independent basis. Like, you don't take each individual property and look at it as a piece of the puzzle. You just sort of see the whole broader picture and say, oh, man, I really like the atmosphere of X game. I spent a lot of time actually in the last several years thinking about it, because it's something that when I like a game, it's almost always got a strong atmosphere as well. Aside from me just liking whatever gameplay, narrative, the atmosphere is like this like sort of abstract entity that sort of ties everything together. It's literally like the air around us. It's something that it invades every single aspect of the game, and the more cohesive each of these aspects are, the stronger the overall atmosphere becomes. And I think that I'm confident enough to say that after thinking about it for so long, I think I have a pretty good way of taking it apart and looking at what it is about the atmosphere that gets you involved in a game. And I'm going to use an example taken from let's just say what you're playing right now. I actually, it's funny because my go-tos when I think of atmosphere tend to be these fields, and I actually don't even remember what they're called. I just know that these fields in The Witcher 1 I remember very strongly, and Resident Evil 4's village in the beginning of the game, or Silent Hill even, are things I think of when I think of atmosphere. And it's quite simple when you really think about it. Like, the most basic aspects are nothing too complicated. It's a combination, I find, of color palette, of a tone of music, and the tone of the narrative at that moment. And I think that if you can get those three things to be cohesive and basically just appropriate to the context of the game, I think you already are on the right track to having some pretty powerful atmosphere. Because so much of the mood that you feel is tied, like that your emotions are tied to those things. The music playing, the visuals, and the narrative. The gameplay, if you can add the gameplay to that, obviously it's a perfect package. But I think the gameplay doesn't always have to be exactly on point to have a strong atmosphere in a location, in a virtual location. Because atmosphere is something that exists outside of games as well. It exists in movies, it exists in real life, in locations. And obviously in a game, you have control over the weather, the foliage, literally everything. So it's a lot easier to tie together a much more not necessarily believable, but a more immersive atmosphere. And I think that if you can get that, I think your game is elevated because of it. Anyways, that's my analysis of atmosphere itself. I could talk about a million other points of it, but I'll let some other people speak.
It's a good starting point. And so you know, the location that you're talking about, the village that defines it is known as Murky Waters. That's kind of what this.
Murky Waters.
That's what it
yeah,
is.
that's.
There's literally a
that's like the
region
lake
next
side.
to it called Fields, so understandable.
But
But
it's just called Fields.
yeah, like Aramon Lakeside, and there's Murky Waters, and then there's another region in this chapter called Fields. So it's completely okay that you just referred to it as Fields.
Okay.
But yeah, and even I didn't remember. I just checked because I was like, oh, what's the village called? Like, oh, it's Murky Waters, and yeah, I agree with what you said. But before I dive into my points in more detail, let's get some more basic ideas of atmosphere. So Louis, what does atmosphere in games mean to you? Louis?
Oh, sorry. I missed the part where you were asking me.
Oh, sorry. It's all good.
To me, well, I have to say Julian's answer was pretty much taking the words right out of my head, because the atmosphere is this often intangible combination of elements that have for effect to catalyze and increase the effect of everything else that's been done to create a mood. So in the example of Resident Evil, they're obviously going for something that's unsettling, something that would create some tension, and then they added to that a color palette and a music, that actually increased that effect to actually great effect. Something like what Dan is playing now, Darkest Dungeon, they went for a very interesting art style full of shadows and interesting play on colors. But they also added to that a narration that was absolutely golden. They added a music that was delicious. And everything else around that game is done and built to create this air of unsettling mystery in the case of Darkest Dungeon. So yeah, for me, atmosphere is first and foremost articulated with music and sound design. And from there, everything builds on top of that to create what we know and love of these very atmospheric games.
Yeah, I agree with you, especially we'll talk about it more later with the music. It's one of the reasons I think Witcher 1 has such a strong atmosphere. It's because it has such a atmospheric soundtrack that goes with it. But we'll get into more of that later. Dan, what do you think of atmosphere in games?
I mean, yeah, once again, it's a little bit of a cop-out answer because both Julian and Louis kind of touched on a lot of what I wanted to say. But I think, if I could highlight a point that I think matters almost most of all when it comes to building atmosphere is music. Music can either use to support a scene or to be used in juxtaposition. It can set the tone in a way that cannot be described by other mediums. I'll look at a game like Doki Doki Literature Club, which has this beautiful little anime schoolgirl, waifu simulator, kind of soundtrack. But what's happening on screen is so uncanny, and I feel like if it had been given this creepy music at the start, it wouldn't have been the same kind of game. I feel like music more than anything else. I'll look at games like Paper Mario. I'll look at, even just Darkest Dungeon, even The Witcher. I feel like their soundtrack does a very good job at setting the mood, more so than the graphics could. And that is my hot take. Sound design above all. Peace out. Mic drop.
Don't drop it. It's inexpensive.
Yeah, first time
It's-
using your
yeah.
new mic, just gonna drop it. All right, all
Yeah,
right.
right.
I respect the commitment to the bit, but seems a little expensive.
I find that really interesting though, Dan, because sound is something that's often overlooked in games, and I think that the part that when I was taught about different aspects of design, the thing you always have to consider is that the player has the option to turn sound off. They can mute it, and therefore it's on their prerogative. It's not required typically to play a game. So sound is optional, but the thing is that when it's used properly, it's so powerful in elevating a game experience. You can even think of a game like Alien Isolation, where the sound is so vital in terms of feeling scared, or even it could be empowering of knowing where the alien is, or knowing where your other enemies are in relation to your character, how to defend yourself, knowing when to be ready on edge. And even in games that aren't scary, like any shooter, online shooters, you need to maybe listen for footsteps for where your enemy is. Those things add so much to a game, feeling immersed in a game for gameplay purposes as well as atmospheric.
Professional interest in the area. You see, I'm a witcher. Any monsters?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, there should be more appreciation because I mean, like I'll even go back a little bit to the Super Nintendo games. Look at the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack, and tell me that didn't make that game. You know?
Oh, fantastic soundtrack too.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like to kind of build off what you said with the shooters, I remember, one of my distinct memories, because it was also like the first test run of my super good wireless headset, or not even my wireless headset, it was my headset before that, and I was playing Battlefield 3, and like you could literally hear every piece of rubble hit the ground in that game. It's insane. It's like you get these little pockets of noise in your headset, and you think, oh, it's just stagnant. No, that's the building next to you coming down. You better run. And it definitely, like, it's certainly because of the audio design, and also the visuals are really nice. One of, if not the most immersive, especially based off sound design, shooters that I've ever played. We always talk about, when people talk about the Battlefield games, the one of the first things that's always brought up is the sound design.
Oh yeah.
And just in general for DICE, you could even say the same thing for the Battlefront, the new Battlefronts as well, because they got all the Star Wars sounds down perfectly and all that. Okay. No, I had a thought, and it went away.
Rip. That
Like the wind.
Yep. Rip. Bye. Okay. Well, since we kind of talked about sound and music and graphics and stuff, let's refine our approach a little bit. What do you think is I think some of you already answered this, but you can kind of go into more detail as to why. But what do you think is the single most important aspect to creating a good atmosphere in a game?
So Dan said sound. So
Yeah,
that's
I'm going to be dying on that hill pretty hardcore.
Now, when you say sound, is that like...
you won't be alone on that hill.
It's a combination of music and just like general sound atmosphere. I'll look at a game like Breath of the Wild, which for the most part didn't really have a lot of music, and what was there was kind of middling piano tunes of classic Zelda themes, except for the battles and whatnot. So the times that combat happened or like exciting events, those swaths of music were so distinct that it really felt like a discovery. It really made it stand out. Whereas when you're just kind of walking around 90% of the time, it's just like if you get a couple piano notes at all, otherwise you get this nice little you get the wind blowing, you hear the grass rustling, and like maybe some sounds off in the distance of someone getting attacked by moblins, or just moblins chilling in general, the snoring of it, like it really paints a picture more than anything else. Graphics are great, 100%, and like obviously they've evolved to become to a lot of people the most important aspect of gaming, but I still feel like there needs to be something to be said about great sound design.
All right. I mostly agree. I would say I put more emphasis on, like for me, I think Louis, you're the same. It's soundtrack is king when it comes to atmosphere. But I also think graphics are very important, not necessarily in the sense that, it needs to have the most polygons and pixels and stuff. But to give you an example, like with The Witcher, I mean, by every single metric you can freaking come up with, The Witcher 3 is a better looking game than The Witcher 1, obviously. Yet the visual style of The Witcher 1 creates a more immersive atmosphere, I find, mixed with the soundtrack, obviously, but a more immersive, dark atmosphere than The Witcher 3 can ever produce. And that comes down, maybe graphics isn't the right word, but artistic design or aesthetic design, I think.
Yeah, I think that's more fitting.
Yeah,
I think I would call it art direction.
Yeah, there you go. That's probably what I was trying to say. So yeah, like art direction. Like I don't even know if I can say that it's less important than the soundtrack to create atmosphere. because like you were saying, Julian, too, a lot of people just don't listen to the soundtracks or the games when they're playing, for one reason or another. So I think perhaps just as importantly as soundtrack is the art direction. Because you can put all the effort in the world to making a dope soundtrack and fancy graphics, and through your themes and your writing and stuff, like The Witcher 1, you could do all these things that it did, but if the game art direction was more colorful, more like the later games are, then you lose something along the way. That nothing, no matter how much everything else kind of picks up the slack. Because at the end of the day, like, video games, first and foremost, as important as soundtracks and sound design are a visual form of entertainment. And I think to really create an atmosphere, especially in games where you have the advantage of being able to actually immerse yourself by being the player. Like, I think, slightly off tangent here, but I think video games create the best atmospheres out of any form of storytelling. At least compared to like movies, certainly compared to like to books, because it has all those factors in play, like the visual, the audio, the writing, but it also has the immersion factor. And I think that really shines when you can kind of lose yourself in the world, which you can do with a really good art direction and sense of place and belonging. That's why games that could have like the best soundtracks, amazing graphics, but if their world is like disjointed, or you have too many here's something we could really get into, maybe the impact heads-up displays or user interfaces have on immersion. Because if I'm playing something like Cyberpunk and other games that go on this trend, like the newer Far Cry's, where you have damage counters as you shoot people, like, nothing breaks my immersion more than that. I turned it off. I never used it once in Cyberpunk. I turned it off immediately. Same for any other game that has, that kind of gamey pop-up, I feel can break immersion and atmosphere much quicker than a weak track in your soundtrack or something along those lines. So I guess what I'm saying is soundtrack can be what, the cherry on top that finally pushes an atmospheric game onto something really memorable. But if you have poor art direction, a terrible user interface, and just all these gamey moments that kind of break the immersion, break the facade that the game is trying to create over you, that reminds you that anything that reminds you that you're playing a game, for me, just right off the bat, breaks immersion and thus breaks atmosphere. I feel like atmosphere and immersion are soul matched lovers. Like you can't have one without the other.
I wanted to say something about that.
Yeah,
I agree with you, and I think it's funny that you're bringing up UI, because Mark Brown of Game Maker's Toolkit, I don't know if you watch his YouTube channel, but it is a masterpiece. He discusses in his latest video the impact of UI and UX on game immersion, and he talks about some games that refresh my memory of games that do this really well. And when you think of the games that do UI the best, it's the games that have mastered the implementation of the UI within the diegetic world. Like, it's diegetic UI. Like, there's an excuse for you as the player to see the information in the game that isn't the fact that you're the player. It's like in Dead Space, where you have the life bar on Isaac's spine. It's there in the game, but you're able to use it as a meter to watch what's happening. Or the fact that his inventory is a hologram that's projected from a suit. Or even Metroid Prime, which is the first game that comes to my mind, where like you're playing a first-person sci-fi character in a sci-fi suit as Samus, and everything you need is on her visor. The HUD is diegetic; it's in the game.
Yeah.
So you have a reason to see that information. The more information you're putting there, aside from it just being distracting, the more you're going to break immersion. And it's a tight balance, because you don't want the player to be uninformed either. You need them to know certain details. But I think that the best place is to let the player just have the option to turn these things off, like most games do. I think that goes a long way.
Yeah. Did you have more to say?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that. I was just gonna say at the end of the day, like the UI is like it can contribute in so many ways. Like even if it is external, like even if like in here right now in The Witcher, like your health bar and whatever is it's not really there, but you need to see that information. But still, they do put in the effort to make things feel more real. Like if you look at your medallion and you while you're turning around, walking around, your medallion reflects the light.
Yeah.
Like they do little things like that, feel more immersed, or just stylistically it looks interesting in The Witcher, like your inventory, or even games like Persona
Yeah.
5, where the entire user interface is just so stylish that you don't even care. It's just like you want to be in the menu all the time because of how cool everything looks.
Yeah.
So there's
Especially
so
with
many ways
Persona.
to approach it. Yeah, exactly. Like you're just like, wow, it's so pretty. It's like
Yeah.
almost like a piece of street art or something. There's so many ways to work with UI and atmosphere, and if you could like, it's not like I wouldn't say UI is the defining factor of atmosphere. It's just
No.
like the more things you add to the coherence of the thematics of the game, the more the stronger the atmosphere is going to be. It's like if everything is in line with each other, everything's in tune. It's like a harmony. Everything's in harmony. You're
Yeah.
going to have like the more powerful the atmosphere becomes, and the more attached you become to the game as well. I mean, you become more invested.
Yeah, no, I agree. I feel, like there are some really good UIs out there that, like you're saying, like add to the atmosphere, nothing else, especially in more sci-fi futuristic games where you can, like, I'm
You
more
can
willing
kind
to
of get
accept,
away with
yeah,
murder in that one.
yeah, but you can also, like, it makes sense that you have all this information on your screen because, like you were saying with Metroid, you're wearing a helmet, or any sci-fi setting can very
Even
easily.
in something like Cyberpunk, like it's reasonable to assume
Oh, yeah,
that
definitely.
the ocular implants would be able to give you such information.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's more when you get games like with more
Dark Souls.
fantasy settings, or any other setting where it doesn't seem logical to have all this information at your disposal, that it starts to, for me, break immersion and break atmosphere. And I do appreciate that a lot of games allow you to turn the HUD off. The only problem I have with that is these games aren't built with that option in mind. It becomes extremely difficult to play some of these games without, like let's say take Skyrim, for example. You turn off quest markers, you're never going to find anything because the game does not naturally describe to you where things go, which is part of the reason why I think Morrowind has arguably the best atmosphere in the series, because there are no quest markers. There's nothing. Your HUD is so minimal, and it makes sense because you're just some bum off a boat in some backwater fantasy setting. And I love that you actually get directions on where to go, and you actually have to explore the world. Like I love games like Horizon Zero Dawn, or the new Assassin's Creed games and stuff, but I feel their HUDs and how handholdy they are, and it's like we're kind of diving into a few issues here, but those things really break immersion for me, to the point where even though the game functions not optimally without the HUD, I would still rather deal with that nuisance than have this giant mark on my screen all the time. Which is why I absolutely loved how Ghost of Tsushima kind of circumvented that with the wind.
The wind.
Like that is
Oh, yeah.
genius game design. While you can keep having things there to guide people, so it's not like a super hardcore get good experience, but you also don't feel like you're just following a generic dot on the map that makes no sense. And it kind of plays into like the mysticism of Japan. It's like you're following the wind and everything. Like I really hope more creative ways to kind of guide the player to quest points and stuff really kind of takes off, because I love those kinds of games, but when I'm just having to follow the GPS everywhere, especially in a fantasy setting, it's really like it kind of breaks the immersion. Whereas the Witcher 1 doesn't have it's got map markers, but on the screen there's no like question marks or dots on the map that are glowing and super gamey. And because I feel like a lot of modern games too don't put as much effort into atmosphere, or maybe it's easier to get away with it because maybe it was easier to make atmosphere back then because you didn't have the technological tools to make the game easier, so you had to really make the world more believable, more immersive. Yeah, it's kind of, it's a balance, because like I said, like you were saying, the HUD can literally make or break a game's immersion based off what the game is and how it's implemented.
I think that goes to say, it's like that's to say for every aspect of what goes into a game. Like I said, like it's all about the harmony of every component. Like it shows that there was such strong communication in the development of the game. Like the vision of the game was understood by everybody. They're like, okay, Persona 5, like the colors, it's like black, red. Those are the colors of Persona 5.
Yeah.
It's so simple. Or
Can't go wrong with
Deus
those
Ex.
colors.
Gold, black, Deus Ex. It's like, I know what the color scheme is for this game. I know the mood, the feeling, the tone. Like it's so pervasive. It's every layer of the game is affected by it. And like when it's that deep, it's like a sponge cake absorbing all the flavor. And it's just like when you get a bite, it's not like any part of that, and no layer of that cake is there anything dry and tasteless. It's all the flavors permeating throughout. And now I'm hungry for cake, but I still think that's an analogy
Aren't we all?
For how a game could be affected by its atmosphere. It's like it's almost like atmosphere and theme. It's like almost like they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
It's like the themes affect the atmosphere, and the atmosphere affects atmosphere affects experience.
Yeah, if anything, the atmosphere is a reflection of the themes of the game, or really good ones should be.
That's it. And I think that like if you think like just literally think of any game. It's like you could see how some tried and in some ways succeed, in some ways failed. Like UI is something that sometimes might get kind of like sidelined. So you'll see like menus that are just generic, like resume, pause, options, exit. Like it was all white font on like a black pause screen. It's like it serves its purpose and it doesn't break your immersion necessarily, but it's not. It's sort of invisible. It
doesn't help it
to
either.
your mind. Yeah, it's just it's mute. It's just whatever. It's something. It doesn't really do anything. It's kind of neutral.
Yeah, it wasn't made to like enhance the experience. It's just there because it needs to be there.
It's a utility rather than rather than something that could. And when it comes to games, literally everything can contribute to it. Like things that like you look at every single friggin' aspect of a game, like the box, the manual, which doesn't exist anymore, fine, but like even the inside, like like when you open a game now, instead of seeing the manual, you might see like the inside lining of the box art. Even that could be immersive. It doesn't necessarily have to be like the controls. You could put like an image there that's like very thematically accurate. The disc art could be thematically accurate.
Yeah.
The main menu could be thematically accurate and immersive. The option screen could be, for Christ's sake. You play games like Afro Samurai. This is a weird one-off example. You go into the option screen and you have Samuel L. Jackson say options, you're out of them. Haha. Like it's like that's fun. Like it's fun to like have like the game. Yeah, my favorite example, and I think this is the most obvious one, is Nier Automata's use of options.
Yes.
And how it's like the options are like her 2B's like system. It's like her, like her.
She's straight up fiddling with her own.
Yeah,
like,
that's a great example of a game with pretty involved heads-up display that doesn't break immersion because they're androids. Like it makes sense to have this information just literally in their eyes or in their mechanical brains and such. And yeah, Nier's another game with incredible atmosphere. Small part because of that.
And the music with
while
we're at it with a made-up language. That's going above and beyond.
Yeah. It's actually reminds me of a thought I had like with Witcher, that kind of plays into that mysticism of having like an unknown language, because like The Witcher doesn't have obviously an unknown language. It's all in English, but especially in The Witcher 3, even like in the English version, all the signs, all the writing in the game is still Polish. And so for me, since I don't know any Polish, obviously, it has that similar immersive effect that, I know it's Polish, but to me, it's just like, okay, this world has its own language that looks and, writes differently than basic English. And I feel like if the signs were just in English, it would break the immersion of the world. But obviously maybe that doesn't apply to actual Polish speakers, so I'm just benefiting from the fact I don't speak Polish. But I think it still kind of falls in the same.
I still
same
think that
vein.
was by design by them.
Yeah, well, it's at least for for the English audience, they're like, yeah, this will, or any non-Polish audience, they're like, yeah, this will be great,
Yeah.
and it was.
You get the same impact with Japanese games a lot of the time. Like
Yeah.
the fact, or watching anime in Japanese, it's like the same thing. It adds like because you're not as familiar with intonations and the Japanese language. Typically, like most people watching, like a lot of Western audiences tend to like the subs over dub because it like it's less cheesy because when a character like for example in a video game or an anime announces their attack like super lightning strike, it sounds cheesy, but if you
Yeah.
say it, if you yell the same thing in Japanese, it sounds kind of cool because you don't really know, you don't understand Japanese,
Yeah.
presumably, and so it just sounds, it'll just sound kind of mystical and more awesome. Even if most voice acting will sound better because you're less attuned to picking up on those things.
Yeah.
So it adds to the overall experience of watching anime or playing a video game in Japanese, or even a game where they speak a Japanese game where they speak English. Let's say in Persona 5, which takes place in Japan, even though people have been to Shibuya Square in Japan, for an outsider, it's almost like virtual tourism. You're going to Shibuya and you're like, wow, Japan's awesome. And although it is stylized, it's Persona, it's just even the exotic level, the exotic nature of visiting Japan at all adds to the atmosphere. So it's just like anything foreign to us has the potential to be exotic and therefore be like atmospheric potentially.
Yeah.
Like Polish.
Agreed. Yeah.
It's kind of crazy now that I'm thinking about traveling and like real life as like an atmosphere of cities and places you visit. Like when I know this is a bit tangential, but like when I think about, I love traveling, and when I think about visiting different atmospheric places, when you visit like a big city, it's one thing, but when you visit like a kind of weird countryside place, more peaceful, serene spot that maybe you're not as used to, there's a natural atmosphere to that, and to what we ascribe to that from what we've seen in movies and TV shows, and what we expect from maybe a quiet countryside, or even a place that's kind of like sketchy. When you go to a kind of scary neighborhood, or like or a spooky place in the forest, it's like you're part of your preconceived ideas of how things are contribute to the atmosphere of a place, which applies to when you're in there in a game as well. Like the game doesn't necessarily have to do anything like that, but you already bring with you as a player like a bank of knowledge that applies to those places.
Yeah.
So you're providing some of the atmosphere just with yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of if it didn't involve any sort of your own personal views and feelings on things, then I don't think there'd be a diversity in what people feel is atmospheric. So a lot of it comes down to like to your own preconceived notions, as well as your own preferences. There are people out there who are more likely to be immersed in a classic medieval or dark fantasy, like The Witcher, but at the same time there are people out there who will be way more immersed in something like Persona, and that just comes down to both their own notions of European history and Japan, as well as their own preferences over what they prefer. At the same time, I still think we can measure atmosphere, but ultimately whether it works for you or not really just comes down to you at the end of the day.
Yeah, 100%.
I think another aspect of atmosphere, again, it's not like it goes without saying, but it's the writing, but not just like necessarily the quality of the writing, but if the tone of the writing matches everything else. And it's to again name drop another YouTube channel in our podcast. I was watching a video earlier today from this YouTuber, Never Knows Best. Does a lot of critiques and analysis on RPGs and stuff. And he has a Fallout video that I was watching, and he brought up this exact point with Fallout 3. Because visually, Fallout 3 is, incredibly, atmospheric. The bleak, blown out rubble, and the green hue, kind of looking like radiation and all that. And it gives the sense, and like the music as well, like not necessarily the radios, but just like the kind of bass ambient music that plays can be very dark and depressing. But what he points out is once you get to the actual writing and the dialogue in the game, the tone is extremely different than what the visuals put forth, because Fallout 3 writing is for the most part very quirky, very comedic in nature in a lot of ways, and like the way he points it out is a lot of the game makes jokes about the wasteland, like what he points out. I'm sure you all know Moira, and how it's like basically this fun little game / joke that she's having you step on mines and get irradiated, and then even afterwards, if you blow up Megaton, she becomes a ghoul. She practically laughs it off, which is in very strong contrast to the dark, depressing nature of a post-apocalyptic world, which is what, and that dark and depressing nature is, the foundation of like the first Fallout. And so for him, and I imagine a lot of classic Fallout fans, there was a huge disconnect and broke the atmosphere for them, that you have this bleak, depressing world, but you have this woman joking about becoming a ghoul, which by all accounts should be a pretty traumatic and terrifying experience.
Yeah, I'd say so, and it almost makes me wonder what Fallout would be like if it exchanged its visual tone with something like BioShock Infinite, like colorful America. Like this Fallout still has a very American themes, kind of like Infinite. So if it had like the same kind of instead of a washed out color scheme, it was more saturated.
Yeah, well, I mean, Fallout 4 kind of goes that route. Like, it's certainly the most colorful of the Fallout games. So in that case, you can argue that maybe the atmosphere is a bit more consistent there, because the tone of the world reflects the tone of the dialogue. It'd be like if this game, Witcher 1, which just looking at, you could say, dark, depressing medieval fantasy, and all it was filled with like butt jokes and or even just like a very basic, cliched good versus evil story, would clash hard with what's presented. And I think that one of the reasons why The Witcher 1's atmosphere works is that even though the writing isn't the highest quality as regards to like grammar and stuff, because it's a bunch of Polish dudes making their first game, the tone and the themes and the ideas brought up in the dialogue are extremely consistent with the world that is presented around it. So yeah, I think it's very important that the dialogue and the story of the game reflects both the visuals and the audio cues of atmosphere. And I think often, at least with Fallout especially, it doesn't. And I think that's why, like, Fallout 3, is definitely an immersive game, especially when you're just kind of wandering around the wasteland. But it definitely loses it a bit when you start talking to certain people who are not acting like they're living in a literal nightmare. Yeah.
I get that.
All right. Well, Louis, Dan, you've been a little quieter. Anything you want to add or say in regards to what we've been discussing?
I'm just trying to think about good questions. Like, what is for each of us? What is our favorite instance of great atmosphere in gaming?
Ooh, that's a tough question.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Horror
horror games especially kind of depend on their atmosphere. I find that you'd be hard pressed to find a good horror game that doesn't also have a good atmosphere, because part of the experience is to bask in this unease and in an almost like permanent state at this point. Wow, my favorite case of atmosphere. That's a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think I'll go with the first thing that came to mind. Might not be my favorite, but maybe the fact it was the first to come to mind is a telltale sign. And I'm gonna go with Super Mario RPG.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Everything from the music to how the characters behave both in and out of the combat. It's just so well executed, both in terms of its like what it tried to do, in the sense that like it's telling a tale that is usually not the Mario style. At least at this point of the Mario franchise, it definitely wasn't. And the soundtrack. I mean, we've spoken quite extensively about how music and sound design can be important, but like I prefer the idea of atmosphere being a bit of a gestalt, in the sense that to create atmosphere you need more than the sum of its parts. And it's usually like atmosphere is going to be this like emerging property that can't really be quantified just by looking at what parts are involved. And Super Mario RPG just executed perfectly on that.
Cool.
So yeah, I guess that would be my answer to your question, Dan.
Yeah.
Fair answer, I'd say.
I think it's interesting. I think it's not a first game that would come to my mind, but to be fair, I have not played much of Mario RPG, so.
Well,
I'll
yeah,
play that.
you got to remember also that like Super Nintendo is my frame of reference when it comes to gaming. So a lot of times when I'm going to hear questions like this, my first like thought process is, what's the earliest game of my life that I can remember having that kind of effect on me? And 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a Super Nintendo game.
I mean, it's fair. There are some pretty big masterpieces, like even Super Metroid probably had some strong atmosphere for its time.
God, it was so good. Oh my God, yeah, that's a very good point you bring up there, because Super Metroid was like, from the title, like you put the cartridge in, you turn power on, the first few notes you hear on top of what you see, with this like slight backstory that's being presented to you just to put things into context, it's pure gold.
For Nintendo, it's kind of dark too, which I find
Very
interesting.
much. It's by far their darkest franchise.
Yeah, I'd agree. I can't think of. Yeah,
Like
not
of the
even
Nintendo properties, Super Metroid is by far the darkest franchise.
Yeah. Well, I think I got a couple answers. I mean, right off the bat, because it's right in front of me, and it's definitely up there, is The Witcher 1. Like I said, or alluded to earlier, it has the best atmosphere of the 3 games, even though it's by far got the weakest graphics. But it's really like the soundtrack, I think, is what really, puts it above the other Witcher games, which also, especially 3, have incredible soundtracks. But the Witcher 1 soundtrack really just like hammers home all the themes and visual aspects of the game. It's like the perfect wrapping to the package. And I think it's very important for a game's atmosphere, to work, it needs to be consistent throughout. And there are plenty of games out there where you have random missions or just entire sections of the game that have dramatic tonal shifts or kind of contrast with what came before, or just something along those lines. But The Witcher 1 is incredibly consistent in its tone, its themes, and what it's trying to convey, throughout its entire 50-hour runtime. But another game that to me has unparalleled atmosphere is Half-Life. It checks all the boxes we've been talking about. I mean, for its time, its graphics, and even today, Half-Life 1 maybe not so much, but Half-Life 2 still holds up incredibly well for a game that came out when we were 12. But it also has it's sparsely used, but has incredible soundtrack that comes in just the right times to give a little oomph to the combat. But what really sets it apart is like its visual design, but also its world-class sound design. like all those classic Half-Life sound effects, whether it's the sound of picking up health, the guns, the gravity gun. Like, it's to the point where, like, I look out into the real world and I think Half-Life.
That's a pretty grim outlook on the real world. I'll give you that.
I mean, these days it's a bit more fair, I guess, but more like visually, like for a game, especially one that came out 2004, like it did such a good job of capturing like that urban atmosphere, and just the way it kind of also conveyed the apocalyptic nature of its world, from little details of like there's no kids around, there's just, and at first you think it's something like there's just, it's design limitations, there's this only X amount of NPCs around. But Half-Life, and I think this is a great thing too, that especially gives older games an edge up in its atmospheres. A lot of times there are aspects of its atmosphere that are created or justified because out of a need, because technically the game can't support what more ambitious stuff. But if a game can kind of justify, like, oh, Half-Life, there isn't a lot of NPCs around, but that's because the Combine have installed basically a sterilization field, and people aren't able to have kids, and that makes the world more believable, more immersive. Whereas a game like Grand Theft Auto doesn't have kids, but there's no in-world explanation for it. So if you think about it, it kind of sticks out and breaks your immersion. But with Half-Life, there's no kids, and they're like, well, that's because no one's been born in like 20 years. And little things like that, and just the art design, the imposing nature of the Citadel, in the backdrop of pretty much the entire game except for when you're inside. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's a really good example. I didn't even think of, for whatever reason, Half-Life didn't even come to mind, but when I'm thinking about Half-Life 2, I'm like, wow, you know what? When I even remember, like, everything surrounding Nova Prospekt even is just so oppressive. I love that atmosphere. That's a good example.
Yeah. And kind of like build off what I was saying there, like, I think a big part of immersion or an atmosphere, is doing everything you can to not remind the player that they're playing a game, which kind of goes back to the discussion of the HUD. But it's more than that too. It's kind of like the way the world is put together. There are games that are built to revolve around the player, and for me at least, almost by default, games that are built that way can never be top tier in regards to atmosphere or immersion, unless they're playing with the narrative of the game, where it's kind of like a fourth wall breaking or something. There are definitely examples. Exceptions to the case, but like the reason why, despite the visual difference, that I would argue Morrowind is at least got a better atmosphere and a sense of immersion than something like Skyrim. It's not just that Skyrim has quest markers that hold your hand to everything. It's that the locations in the world are built for your ease of use and benefit. And you can argue whether it's worth having these things for quality of life, because like the main example in Skyrim is that literally or nearly every single dungeon or cave has a little shortcut at the end that takes you right back to the beginning, almost without exception. And that's great, because like it's annoying to have to walk back through a freaking ginormous dungeon to get back to the entrance, but at the same time, having every single one of these have these exact same kind of shortcuts back to the beginning breaks immersion, because you feel like these places are built for your convenience.
Yeah, I get that.
Whereas, games that don't hold your hand or don't revolve around you automatically have a more atmosphere and immersion, because the whole point of atmosphere and immersion is to make yourself feel like you're there, right? Or at least a big part of it is to make yourself feel like you're there, that this world is real and living. These characters are significant and important to you, but I feel a lot of that is lost if the game is revolved around not just in the sense, like, I'm not shitting on games that are like, oh, you're the hero. Like, that's fine. I love games like that. But make me the hero, give me the cool powers, but don't build things in the world that are catered to me when it makes absolutely no sense. Like the shortcuts in dungeons, or the ability or the fact that you can join every single faction in that game and become the leader of every single faction with zero consequence. That's just... Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think you could potentially. You don't have to make it more believable, but you have to be sneaky about it.
Yes, yeah,
I think
definitely.
I think Dark Souls does a good job with like shortcuts. I think if they had
Yeah,
implemented something like that in Skyrim, it may have helped a little. Like instead of it always being the same case of leading you back like a shortcut to the entrance, you could have had like ladders you could activate or things you can like open from one side, like a secret like well I guess they do have like secret passages, or you could just destroy a wall or something like from that's a very one-sided thing. I think the idea of dropping down a ladder is the first thing that comes to mind, or maybe extending a bridge, pulling a lever, and then like a bridge turns and like leads you back to the a place that's in the entrance. There's ways to do it that, or maybe it doesn't even have to lead you to the entrance, but drop you off somewhere beforehand using different tactics that feel a little more involved rather than just an immediate route back through the beginning.
yeah. I think Dark Souls is a great example, especially Dark Souls 1. Dark Souls 2 is kind of a little not the case, but Dark Souls 1 in particular does a really good job of keeping the world connected, open up these shortcuts that can benefit you, but in a way that feels natural and seamless. It doesn't, the shortcuts in Dark Souls don't feel like they're there for you. They feel like they're just logical ways that this world or this building or this land was kind of constructed. Whereas, like compared to Skyrim, where it's like, oh, this is just clearly here for me. So yeah, definitely agree. Dark Souls is a great example of that.
Yeah, and then Dark Souls 3 proceeded to make the whole thing moot by just allowing you to teleport right off the bat.
Yeah, that's why I hate. I mean, Dark Souls 2 as well, but I get that because it's such a disjointed world. But that's one of the reasons I always still say Dark Souls 1 is my favorite, is because of that. Because it has the best atmosphere of those 3 Dark Souls games. I'll give it to you. When I beat it, I may say Bloodborne has the best atmosphere, because my God, is that an atmospheric game?
Oh my God, yeah.
But as far as like the 3 core Dark Souls games, 1 has by far the best atmosphere because its world is so cohesive and practical, but not built around you. So yeah, that's my point. There it is. Yeah. Did everyone answer Dan's question? I don't think you did, Julian.
I don't think Dan did.
No, I know he didn't. He's just waiting to the end. But I was wondering.
Yeah, exactly.
Julian,
Trust me, I'm not just going to leave you hanging.
Okay, good. Well, I'll just say that I think mine is probably somewhere between. Oh man, there's a million games, but I'm just gonna say Doom and Persona 5. I think that Doom, the remake.
Mhm.
I mean, all the Dooms have great atmospheres, but I think that Doom, the remake, did such a good job at like Doom, the original Dooms, and even Doom 3, which Doom 3 took a little bit of a different turn towards closer to horror, something like Dead Space. The Doom remake captured like some of like the horror aspects, like of like the bleak atmosphere, but still like there's like this underlying feeling of like of carnage and visceral violence in everything.
Yeah.
From like the machinery, there's like lava, everything's industrial, it's industrial or it's gore. There's like no in between.
Yeah.
And you're usually adding the gore to the industrial yourself. That's the process of the game. So you're just brutally destroying everything. The music just adds to it. Everything is just programming you to become just a wild killing machine. Persona 5 I already pretty much explained earlier in terms of its atmosphere, but Doom I think does a really great job as a shooter of capturing that as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Nice. Well, I mean, to no one's surprise, one of my favorite atmospheric games is a Zelda game, Majora's Mask, of course. I mean, I had to do it to him. Yeah, I mean, like I can't say never before has a game like really captured that kind of dark yet lighthearted essence, but then my mind kind of harkens back to Earthbound, which obviously came out beforehand and which also had a amazing atmosphere. One that like really sold you on the world and the characters like right off the bat, just made you feel as though like this is right. This is like, and it was so unique right off the bat, you know, like it's familiar because you're fighting enemies that you think that you end up fighting, you know, like you're hitting. It was a little brutal, I guess, but you're hitting like dogs and birds with baseball bats and like, you know, kneecapping people at the arcade. But it was a great game. and through its colorful graphics, familiar setting, and like kind of nice chip tune yet slightly dark soundtrack, it created the perfect environmental
Yeah, just
aesthetic.
listen to the last boss fight of
Oh my
Earthbound and
god.
tell me that's not fucking metal AF.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I just hope you know what you're doing. I do. Geralt,
But yeah, I'd say that's my bit.
how do you like the country?
All right.
Wonderful. Wine, women, song, and dice through the night. Dice?
All right. Does anyone else have any atmosphere-related questions?
It's incredible.
Or
Try me. Some
How about you, Jacob?
poker as I am poetry.
How about you? Do you have any questions?
I'm thinking.
Yes, Jonas.
You'll be looking for solace among the elves.
Okay.
One of them's not bad, actually.
What is the single biggest immersion breaker for you?
Ooh.
Bugs.
That's fair.
That's fair.
Like unintentional jank is just a huge mood break.
All right. Well, let's say a game is bug-free. What besides bugs would break immersion? Because obviously, a very intense
Yeah,
scene
no,
with a
these things
T-poser.
happen, especially given like the forever complexifying nature of producing video games.
Yeah.
Like it's going to be harder and harder to avoid as we move forward. So in that context, then I guess I would say hand holding. I absolutely abhor the modern style of hand holding where there's just markers everywhere and you're kind of never left for yourself to figure out where to be or what to do. And yeah, that is one of my pet peeves. I really dislike excessive hand holding. I would much rather have something that makes sense in the grand scheme of the world, like Navi. As annoying as Navi was, she made sense, and you didn't have to listen to what she was saying. You had to listen to her calling for your attention, but beyond that, you didn't have to do anything about what she was trying to tell you, and it wasn't filling your screen with arrows and like traffic circulations and a mini map, and she was just reminding you, hey, maybe you should go talk to Ruto, you know, like she's important. So yeah, for me, excessive hand holding is a huge deal breaker.
Even like pop-up texts, like tutorial windows popping up, being like, "You can do this." Like the ones that pause the game for you.
Oh
It's
my
like
God.
you're in a combat scenario. Press
Yeah.
the attack button. Like, oh, all right. Press the attack button. It's like if you press the attack button 3 times, I'll do a combo. All right. And then before you press it, it's like if you press the heavy attack button after pressing the attack button 2 times, I'll do a triple backflip combo. Like, oh, okay, I'll do that. And then you jump, and it's like you just started jumping. You could do a jumping combo too, and you're like, oh.
Anyone who just started a fresh run of City Skylines would know too well what you're talking about, because the little pop-up to tell you what the hell is going on, it's like if you just brush your mouse over something that you haven't touched yet, it's gonna like ding and then open a little window like, did you know that roads have vehicles on them? No, you don't say.
I don't believe you.
Bananas.
Geez, like mind blow, right? Like I get it, if you've never played a game of a certain genre, like there can be a lot of information that you want the player to have because he kind of needs it, but there's so many better ways to do it than to just like shove window over window at your player.
Fortunately, that's the easiest way to do it, which is why
Yeah,
I see
which
so much
is
of it.
it's sad. Rest in peace, intelligent design.
Yeah.
There are a lot of really clever ways to put in tutorials, because the tutorials are necessary for getting people into, like, you want to appeal to as broad an audience as possible, but you don't want to annoy the experienced gamers either. So you have to be very, very clever. And I think a lot of games have started this trend of asking first. They're like, "Have you played like a shooter before, pal?" And you're like, "Yeah." And they're like, "All right, well, we'll tone it down for you." But if you're like, "I don't even know what a gun is," they're like, "Okay, well, we'll
Yeah.
do it."
Yeah.
Like, I respect that a lot. Like, and I even think of a game like Titanfall 2, where which is also free right now, I think, or maybe
Yeah.
today's the last day of it being free. But you have to do that little sort of. I think Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare does that, where like in the beginning of the game, there's like a a test. They're like, hey, let's do like a basic training, private or whatever, for both Titanfall and Call of Duty. And both games you have to do like a little obstacle course, and it's like, oh, it's actually kind of fun to try and like get the high score for both those games. I try to do them as fast as I can, but in the process, you are legitimately just learning how to play the game and getting good at it too. So it's like, I think that is a really cool way of doing it. Like again, diegetically instead of being like in a story, and then like your characters have to fight someone, and they're like, okay, well, we don't have any context to teach it to you. But if you teach it in the story, it's like, wow, that goes a long way. Even Fallout does that really well. Fallout 3, you're in school, and there's like, okay, there's roaches and stuff. Like, oh, I have to shoot the roaches, and bad roaches are much less threatening than like a super mutant or something. So
Yeah.
throwing you something small and very accessible, in the way of dialogue trees, in the way of combat, it's like, it's so reasonable and it's part of the story, so it feels a lot more exciting than, you know, having to read 20 pop-ups in a row to know how to kill someone. Anyways, yeah, that's my opinion on tutorials in terms of immersion.
Yeah, I think actually Fallout 3 is a great example of a tutorial done well, at least in regards to immersion, because it all just, you know, makes sense. Like take Cyberpunk, you know, you hang out with Jackie for like 6 months, and then he's like, here, take this training program before we do this big mission.
Yeah.
And it's like, what have I been doing for the last 6 months, you know?
Yeah.
Like, whereas Fallout, it's like, okay, you're literally gonna have your entire childhood, and it, in that context, it makes sense to be handholdy because you're a child, literally.
Even a baby at some point.
Yeah, you literally
Yeah.
are born. Like, although they do put a lot of pressure on you, force you to decide what you are when you're born, just after
Yeah.
you're born. But you know,
Gender, what do you want to look like when you're older? Like, oh my god.
why? Why?
More of a decision than I was expecting to make at 5 hours old.
Jeez,
Yeah.
right?
Don't have all day, man. Enter the
Yeah.
form.
Well, one thing, because I 100% agree with you, Louis, on, you know, the hand holding. I think it kind of goes hand in hand with what I was saying about feeling like the world is built around you, or feel like the world is its own thing. And I think one aspect of this, I'll go into a bit more detail on, that really can break immersion is level scaling. Like, for example, in Oblivion,
Oh god.
it's
yeah.
insanely immersion breaking, atmosphere breaking, to one day you would just waltz out of the Imperial City, come across some meager fucking bandit camp, and they're decked out in Daedra gear. It's like, what? And also, beyond that, though, when you have a game like Oblivion that consistently scales to you, it destroys your sense of progression. I mean, we've talked about this. Oblivion literally is more punishing if you level up than if you don't. And that obviously is a big problem. But I love, like, one of the things I love that creates a believable world and atmosphere is to be able to come across something that maybe you can't necessarily deal with, or isn't going to, you know, nerf itself so that you can. Like, I was playing Morrowind the other week. I came across this guy who, like, wants me to kill him because he's at the end of his warrior life, but there is absolutely no way I can accomplish that at this point. And then when you get into things like that, the payoff is that, okay, you ignore it for a bit, you go off, you do the easier stuff, and then when you level up a bit and you come back, you feel a real sense of progression. Not that the world is, like, kind of bowing to you, but that you are getting stronger within this world. You know, like, it's super annoying, but there's something to be said about the fact that you will swing your sword at a mud crab at level 1 in Morrowind 100 times and hit it twice. And then, a good chunk of time later, you'll swing it once as, like, an afterthought and destroy it. So I guess what I'm trying to say is a real sense of progression and a world that is not revolving around you in that progression. You know, Skyrim struck a nice balance because there are some things you can come across that are overpowered, but a lot of it is still scaled. But Morrowind, it was like, this is just a world that exists. You are just, at this point, an insignificant part of it. And it's on you to work your way through the trials and tribulations of this world to become the significant part of it. Whereas with Skyrim or and even Oblivion right off the bat, you're like, you are the guy now. Like, you got to get this amulet to Martin, or you got to take care of these dragons. And the world immediately kind of revolves around you as a result. So yeah, that's something that really breaks immersion and atmosphere for me. Yeah, that would be my more specific answer.
It's good though. I strongly agree. I'm someone who tends to prefer. I love the feeling of getting really strong in an RPG and becoming powerful.
Yeah.
And when the levels of the enemies match me exactly, it just feels like, why am I even doing
Why
it?
even bother? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like they're gonna keep going with me. So it's my newfound powers are just, if it's just like upping my numbers, then it doesn't do anything. It might as well stay the same in theory, unless they increment them at a lower rate.
Yeah.
But even then, I feel like my favorite method of doing this is to have regions that are more dangerous than others. Things like, you know, the recent Assassin's Creed games do that.
Yeah.
They have like sections of the map that are like a little higher level. So you're encouraged, and like they still let you roam freely. You could even still go to these dangerous places,
Yeah.
but you just better watch your ass, because you might get yourself killed. But then when you get strong enough, I like the idea of returning to places I've been to and feeling like I could champion it and then crush all the content that I may have missed. Like, go back and be like a king. Be like, yeah, I'll take on any quest because I'm so strong now.
Yeah.
I think that the ideal, like the best way, and this is obviously the hardest way, is to not have this. I like not having the stats at all, and it being like a purely skill-based thing, and your own skills develop to the point that you have to become good enough to overcome the challenges that come later. And I think that even Dark Souls, even though Dark Souls does have like levels and
I
numbers,
was just gonna say, yeah.
you could technically just know how to parry like badass and just go and wreck everybody. Like, you
Yeah.
could be naked from the beginning of the game and be like, I don't care. I'm a master of parrying. I know all the patterns. Nothing can stop me. Like,
Yeah.
that's just you. You could just get that good without the need of leveling. And
Yeah,
I think
and
that well,
sorry.
regardless, there's no level. I was just gonna say there's no level creep in. The enemies don't match your level
No.
in Dark Souls regardless, which both ways are great.
Yeah, no, it's actually a
Dark
great
Souls is
point.
hard.
Yeah, with the skill, like I think that's a big part of why Dark Souls became popular and a big part of why people are so proud to beat it, because you feel like you feel the progression from that little hollowed fucking piece of nothing in the asylum to the guy who's literally slaying Gwyn. Like, you feel that progression. In that case, it has more to do with just the overall skill than leveling up. But you can still get that even with, you know, stat heavy games like for me, especially like with all the CRPGs I play, like Pillars and stuff. Like, there isn't like the same kind of skill barrier as far as like, you know, being able to quickly do the right moves, the parries and stuff. There's still skill in kind of understanding your class and how you approach situations. But even then, like, even just with the leveling up and all the diverse avenues to do so in games, especially like Pathfinder, like, can have a very similar effect. Which is why if a game isn't skill based, and it's like, you could have like skill based games and stat based games, and I think both can be equally as immersive and have an equal sense of progression, as long as the stat based ones have enough diversity in what you can do to make what you're doing feel unique or different, or at least, you know, not the exact same thing everyone else is going to do in a situation. Whereas games that are stat based, where it's just like Fallout 4, for example, where it's like it's really like no real difference, then you don't get that sense of progression, unless there's a big skill component, which I would think it's fair to argue Fallout 4 doesn't have that. It's a pretty by the book shooter that anyone who knows how a shooter works can play. Whereas something like Doom, for example, is a great example of skill-based progression, because it gives you everything. It gives you the tutorials too. Every time you encounter a demon, like, here's its weak points, and you think, oh wow, that's really nice of it just to kind of give me that. And then you realize, wow, I need that information, and even with that information, I'm still getting my ass smashed, because they don't care about you like learning those systems or the rules as your form of progression. They just care about you being able to, you know, blow that thing's face off
Yeah,
skillfully.
knowing's not the hard part, it's executing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then on the other side, it's like it's less about executing and more about knowing. But I think both can work depending on the genre of the game and all that. But one way or another, whether it's skill or stat based, a real sense of progression and a real sense, and you get this easily with skill, but I feel like stat based games lack this, at least in the modern ones or and such, is like the sense that you can fail. Because a skill based game, anyone can fail, because if you're just, you know, a dyslexic monkey, like you're going to struggle. Like, but if it's purely, you know, stat based, like it's harder to just kind of fail in of itself unless the game, like I say, has a really deep class system or choice and consequence system, or just so many different ways to, you know, resolve issues. So yeah, to wrap up, progression is important, and a sense of improvement is important, and a sense that whether it's your skills or your smarts, that the things you are
Something's
thinking
gotta
of,
give.
yeah, you know, there's nothing as amazing as trying this interesting maneuver in like an action game and pulling it off, or in like a or more traditional RPG, like thinking of like, oh, what if I could approach a situation this way, and then the game supports it, and you're like, wow, that's amazing. Did everyone answer biggest immersion breaker? It's been a while. I don't remember.
Immersion breaker.
I don't think I did. I'm still thinking too.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's a bit of a tough one. I mean, yeah, I mean, just things that feel out of place in a game, you know. Let's see.
I think I have one if you're still thinking, Dan.
Yeah, no, I'm still pondering. Go for it.
I think, and this is very specific, so it's just what comes to mind, but I think that responsiveness in combat in games goes a long way with immersion. And it's a bit, this is really tough in a game that's a shooter, for example, because some shooters tend to add RPG elements. So when you're shooting an enemy in the head, for example, they might not respond to it realistically, like let's say the Division. When you shoot an enemy in the Division in the head, you're like, oh, okay, because the game is presenting itself realistically. So whereas in a game in Borderlands, when you shoot someone in the head and they don't die, there's a little more leeway to like your sense of disbelief is like your suspension of disbelief is more like present in a game like Borderlands, since it's already presenting itself with the art direction of cel shaded graphics, and like it's a little comic booky already, so your brain's willing to accept it.
Yeah.
But in games like The Division, it's a little harder to swallow the whole I'm shooting you and you're not dying, like to a certain degree, because already in video games you could shoot people usually more than you would in real life, which is like, you know, you shoot someone once in the foot and it's, you know, they're done probably. Like you're gonna at least fall, like it's done. But in a game you'll be shooting someone at least a few times and they'll kind of like flinch, like in Uncharted, for example, you shoot someone a few times, they'll be like, oh, and like you kind of accept it to a degree. And I think that like the further you push that envelope of how many bullets someone's gonna take, or how many swings of a sword. Although again, sword swinging fantasy games, again, it's also a little more. There's more leeway.
Yeah.
It's really shooting games, I think, where like guns are like, we understand how guns work. and
You
we
might
know
as well be playing paintball when you play video games.
Yeah, because their guns are so incredibly lethal, and unless you were like covered in 8 feet of Kevlar, like shooting someone with a full pistol clip, which is usually the weakest weapon if it's not a Desert Eagle or something.
Yeah.
You're shooting someone with a pistol, like with a full clip in the chest, like they're gonna be down. Even if they're wearing a bulletproof vest, it'll probably be like like
A bulletproof vest would leave you with a big bruise.
Yeah, they'd be
Big
hurt.
bruise.
Still going to be knocked out of the encounter, you know.
Like even assuming that you're wearing like the proper kind of protection for the caliber that's being shot at you, it would very much be enough to take the wind out of you and get you to your knees.
Like I do get the fundamental game design reasons for this. Like you'd be like unstoppable. The game, or it would be like one shot KO. Everything would be super hot essentially.
Yeah.
If you were playing, if you made it realistic. So I get it, but there's the margin of error is not too big. Like you really do have only so much you can do, and if you turn up a game's difficulty and you make it so that people become bullet sponges, you may as well not even have the hard difficulty. In my opinion, it's not more difficult; it's just more tedious, and it's like and you have the added negative, not a benefit, the opposite of a benefit. What would the opposite of a benefit be? Would be
A detriment.
Detriment, yeah.
yeah, perfect. The added detriment of it being more immersion breaking as well, because it's also just it's not believable, and it's it's tedious. So I don't know many people who have openly admitted to enjoying games with like the more bullet spongy, the better. Like I want to be fighting the same guy with a gun for the next 10 minutes. I want to unload all my clips. I want to be out of ammo by the time this encounter is done. It's like maybe if it's a boss fight, but if every enemy is like that, it's like okay.
Yeah. And
draining.
it's a problem the Assassin's Creed games have. The whole you can't one-shot higher level enemies with your, assassination stealth move. Like you were saying, it's like shooting someone in the head and they don't die. It's the same kind of deal, which is one of the reasons why some people are less fond of the new Assassin's Creed compared to the old ones. Because back in the old ones, where it was an assassin game, you could one-shot anybody you got up to with your blade. But yeah, there's something like in the Odyssey, like fucking taking my little spear through the guy's entire fucking body, and then he's just like, that was 30% of my health. Let's go now.
Yeah, exactly.
Or like the
Ain't no thing.
like the X-ray moves in Mortal Kombat, or like the super moves in Injustice. You're like throwing him into space, and like I get it if you're like doing it to Superman, but if you like take Batman and you take him into space and you're like punching him through a planet.
There's not going to be a round 2. That's
He's gone.
No, like he's physically gone. Like he's not just dead. Like his body ceases to exist. He no longer exists. You have removed Batman from this plane of existence.
You've done the impossible and destroyed matter.
You monster.
Yeah.
Poor Bats.
Yeah, but it's like I agree with that. Like the immersion breaking, like or like even Mortal Kombat, when they show you, like they're not just showing you like someone getting stabbed. They're showing you like you stab them through the eye, through their brain. You're like, oh, so they're dead. And they're like they fall to the ground and then like wipe their face off, and they're like, okay, I'm good. And they're like, oh my god,
it's just a flesh wound.
Yeah, like buddy, just leave. It's good. You could leave. It's done. It's not worth it.
I'll give you back real quick. I just need to super pee.
Super
P.
Damn.
Super P.
Yeah, so but just to keep going on that, like it's something that I get is very video gamey, like doing a really powerful move on someone and it can't just die because then the game is too easy / hard.
That's
depending on the reactions. But I love the way that some games go about that problem, like the way, like I remember, I think it's Rainbow Six Vegas. I like how you're very fragile, and so is everyone else. It's like you need to be really careful and think really smart. You have to think with like strategy, because everyone's weapons are super lethal, yours and the enemy. So you have to be careful, strategic, and smart with every encounter. Yeah. And I like
Rainbow
that
Six is less about the shooter and more about the tactical.
Yeah, although if you compare the newer ones to the old ones, it's like oof.
A lot of
you don't even know what tactical means.
Especially in the tactical shooter genre, have fallen victim to the whole.
Yeah, talk about a dead genre.
Being super, yeah. I didn't want to say it, but
yeah. No, I mean, I've played, like, I own like the original first like 3 Rainbow Six games, like came out in the 90s, and like compared, I haven't really played Siege, but I've seen gameplay and such, and like it's not the same. Rainbow Six Siege is more aptly could be called Call of Duty Tactical than a Rainbow Six game.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I have a question. I'm just trying to think of the best way to word it so that it makes sense.
Using English words is probably your best option.
Oh yeah, I got that part figured out. It's just what exactly am I trying to convey here? Okay, what's a game? Okay, what's a game that is good, but you think or feel
Good, but could be better.
Could be better, but in regards to like which game desperately needs more work put on its atmosphere, or what's a game that's good despite its atmosphere or lack
wait.
thereof?
Jacob, did Dan answer our last question? Like the
That's a good
immersion
point.
breaking.
Did he? I don't think so.
No, I mean, it really just comes down to, I guess, bugs that, like little bugs that are graphical, no big issue. Like, I can deal with a little bit of immersion breaking. At the end of the day, I know I'm playing a video game, so I can deal with a little bit of that. It's bugs that ruin the experience, that, like, make it so you can't complete quests, or that your save file gets bugged, or, like game breaking, just total immersion fucking things. Or if a game studio talks a lot of shit about how great their game's going to be and how perfect it's going to be, and then, you know, there's a Cyberpunk. And,
Yeah, they drank their own tea a little too much.
I mean, just a bit. There's a little bit of, you know, well, they're taking the piss in more ways than one, and it's not great. But that's it, really.
Okay. So yeah, what's a good game that you think is good but doesn't have a good atmosphere, or could desperately use a good atmosphere, or is lacking in atmosphere, and why?
Good game lacking atmosphere. I don't necessarily know that I could think that even exists.
It does.
I feel like you need atmosphere to be a good game.
You'd think.
I mean, that's my strong opinion about that.
I'm going to disagree. I do think that there are games that might have fundamentally fun core systems, but the worlds that they take place in lack the personality they need to feel like more interesting and alive. And I would say, this has got to be my choice. The game that like falls just short in atmosphere is Final Fantasy 15 to me.
Oh yes.
Oh, interesting. I really completed that, so.
So I think that some areas in Final Fantasy 15 are visually stunning. So you have like different towns, different cities, even the environments, just beautiful. But if you walk around any of the towns, there is this nagging feeling of something is kind of off. Like nobody has walk cycles. They don't patrol. Everyone's stationary with very little animations, kind of a la Sonic 06, where you just have a lot of people standing in place. It feels very dead. Nothing feels. It's not alive. Like it feels like a game, or it feels like an amusement park, and you're the only one there. There's this kind of sense of uncanniness to visiting the places. Like, and it's something that I find that, strangely enough, I find that a lot of Japanese games tend to struggle with more than Western games, is making their cities feel believable. And like, I think that like when I think of Persona 5, for example, they have like different models who are kind of moving around, so it helps. And you have like people who are talking with speech bubbles. Again, there needs to be enough people to justify it. There are some places in Final Fantasy 15 where like a whole like little village city / thing will have like 4 people, and I'm like that doesn't really feel right. Like there's
Yeah. Where are the people?
or it's just like they're not saying anything, or they can't interact, and they're not moving, so they're just kind of there. And they'll have like a one-liner maybe if you walk by them. They'll be like, I just went to this other fantasy city. It was very good. I like the food here. And you're like,
Nothing like sea breeze in the morning.
Canned responses, yeah.
It feels a little too weird. Everything ends up feeling like it doesn't connect properly, and your brain picks up on it very much. Even though yes, it's a video game, I get it. It's just It also makes it so that you don't want to visit the town areas, because it's just like, well,
There's nothing there,
it's not. It's not very interesting.
and there's
You
nothing.
really quickly learn the tells of a character that's just gonna drop one of the one-liners.
Yeah.
And then you'll recognize whoever's a shopkeeper or whoever's important to speak to. So ultimately, the only people you interact with are going to be the ones you have to.
Yeah. To swing back real quick to immersion breaking features, nothing like a ghost town of mannequins to break immersion.
Oh god.
Yes. Yeah. 100%.
Especially in
Like,
modern
that's-
games where it's like inexcusable. Like Morrowind, for example, everyone stays in one spot. This was a game that was made 20 years ago. You know, it was limited by its technology, but made it up for it other ways. But especially in a modern game, like it's something I noticed with the Nier remake, because it's made off an older game, and it's very like static, the encampments and the towns and stuff. Yeah, just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah. I think Julian's explanation kind of gave me the idea of what I was gonna pitch for being seriously lacking in atmosphere. And for me, it would be something like Dark Souls 2.
Yeah, I was gonna say
The
that.
formula is tried and true. Like Souls games, they're always gonna be right up there in my top forever. But Dark Souls 2 feels so bland, so disjointed. Like at every seam you pull, there's just something wrong. And it's just like at this point, if I can dig the idea of Dark Souls just for the sake of more Dark Souls,
Yeah,
but at the same time, if it's just gonna be a bit of a diluted feel of the Dark Souls, then I'm just gonna pass and wait for an actual good game. But yeah,
yeah. I think the Dark Souls 2 is one of, if not the best examples of a good game with little to no atmosphere, or at least not a good one.
Yeah, well, that's a good point.
But
like
a
it
couple.
tried really hard in some areas.
Yeah,
Like
definitely.
Majula, like if you do just the tutorial and get to Majula, like yeah, okay, there's a bit of atmosphere there. Like
In certain
you go
regions, for
from a place
sure.
that's you go from a place that's kind of weird and like things betwixt, where it's just like the cross between dimensions, or I don't know. They never really explain it, so it's,
Yeah.
it's a little weird. But and then you get to Majula, and unlike just about any place in Dark Souls before, like the sun's shining bright in Majula. It's not something you're used to seeing in the Soulsverse. And then you start moving about, and like Dark Souls never had a soundtrack other than some very like specific areas that usually had it for very specific reasons. But even in that eerie silence, it just fails to capture what Dark Souls 1 had in its environment.
Yeah. Agreed.
Like Dark Souls 1 was just everywhere, everything
King
you
of
looked
atmosphere.
at. Like oof, even Demon Souls before it.
Oh
was just
yeah,
like,
the what's the place called? The prison with the chimes.
oh yeah, that place
Oh.
is amazing. Or if you go, like I still keep very, very like I can't call them fond memories because it was by far the area I hated the most. But the reason I hated it the most, which was oh my god, what are the plague lands called? I don't remember. And I usually
Oh,
remember that because anyways.
I don't think I ever
There's
got
the
that
Valley
far.
of Defilement. Thank you,
Yeah.
Brain, for working overtime today. There's this place in Valley of Defilement where it's just like everything. Like you don't want to be there, and you shouldn't want to be there. Like this whole place is out to like tell you like you shouldn't be here. Get the fuck out. Whether it's like the narrow walkways, just the general like poisonous swamps, and it just works so well into sending that foreboding sense that like you shouldn't be here, that you'll find only death here. Like literally, in the words of some of the NPCs, like you'll find only death here. Go away. And it works so well even without music. But Dark Souls 2 just comes in, does basically the same thing, but it feels so, and you'll forgive the pun, it feels so soulless.
Yeah,
Hey.
I like it. Pun approved.
That was like my first. Well, aside from Demon Souls, Dark Souls 2 was the first one I finished because I kind of skipped over Dark Souls
God,
1
you're so-
originally.
You have so many weird
I know.
and knowing what I know about you, there's just occasionally you say something like, oh, like I have my own too. We all do, but like, man, there's some things that stand out.
Yeah, like I played. I like for the longest time didn't play Zelda. I only played Minish Cap.
Yeah, see,
and,
like,
how
that's
did
one of
you-
mine,
Minish Cap
too,
was
you
a good
know?
one at least.
But it's still very out. Like of all of them, it's just a strange choice. Like it just so happens that it's the one that I happen to play, or like Final Fantasy VII. I never played, but I played. It's like there's like series where I played the quote unquote the wrong ones. Like that's very frequent with me. We're like,
Yeah.
yeah, I never played that one, but I did play the one
Yeah.
everyone hates.
I think that's the
one
weirdest
everyone-
part because, like, for me, I've never played Zelda, but I've played Breath of the Wild, which I think most people are like, oh, okay, that makes sense, you know. But if you're like,
Yeah.
oh, I've played all the
I've
Souls
actually
games
used
except for
one.
Dark Souls 1, you're kind of like,
Who the
How?
fuck are you?
how did
Yeah,
that even happen?
I actually I don't even think I have an answer for that. I don't.
that
remember
that
why
honestly is
happened.
probably the best answer.
I don't remember what happened.
not
I just don't have one. But yeah, like Dark Souls 2, when I played it, I don't think the atmosphere was the first thing that jumped out at me as being like anything wrong. But maybe it's because I also I wasn't able to compare it to Dark
Yeah.
Souls 1, so I wasn't holding it against anything in particular. I was just like, well, it's been a long time since I played Demon Souls, and this game is hard too, and I like it. So I enjoy Dark Souls 2. I don't see it as flawed as I think you guys tend to, because again, I never really got as into Dark Souls 1. So, but Dark Souls 3, on the other hand, I did get a bit more into, and I know that that's also different from Dark Souls 1, but the atmosphere felt pretty.
It's definitely
strong,
definitely an improvement
Yeah, Dark Souls
over
3
2.
did right what Dark Souls 2 did super wrong.
Yeah, I'd still argue Dark Souls 1 has the better atmosphere overall, but Dark Souls 3 definitely righted the ship compared to 2 by far.
I'd say, honestly, every FromSoft game is pretty damn good at setting the atmosphere, even pre-Demon Souls. Like, I've tried a bit of Kingsfield, and I was like, very oppressive, and it's hard, but not in a, I find not in a particularly fun way. Like, it's so archaic that I'm like, yeah, I can't play it. Like, I could not play it.
Yeah,
At least I
that
know
sounds
the
like
function.
most of what I heard about it.
Like, Demon Souls is still basically the Dark Souls formula. Like, you know the basic rules
Yeah.
of how to play. But when you play Kingsfield, it's like, oh, I was like, oh, what's this? And I walked up to it, and I'm like, oh, I'm dead. Okay. Like, and then I was like, well, now that I know that, I could try to. Okay, no, I'm dead. Or like, what if no, I'm dead. Like, I'm like, I don't even know what's happening anymore. Like, it's very, because it's almost too old, and like, it would take a very big commitment to understand the mechanics and everything. I just wasn't willing to put in the effort for that. But despite all the gameplay, there was like a very impressive amount of atmosphere in where I was. Like, the sense of mystery that I think FromSoft does really well. It's like this like strange and dangerous place, like Louis was just saying. You visit these fantasy locations, and you feel like you're on a forbidden property, or you're trespassing. The feeling of trespassing is like really powerful, I find, in Dark Souls. Like, you're in forbidden lands,
Yeah.
they're dangerous, and like one false step could get you killed, and you don't. And I remember I used to consider Demon Souls one of the scariest games I've ever played, and I love horror games because I'd see something and I'm like, I have no idea what that is, and it's terrifying. I'm like, what is that weird creature? And then it'll kill you in a way you didn't even really imagine it would. You're like, oh, that's how it's.
It's like, oh, it has an extra limb I wasn't aware of.
Yep.
And that makes no sense automatically, but hey, here we are.
It has like a wind up, and you're like, oh, it's about to attack me. You're like, it looks like it's gonna swing a sword, and then like something pops out of its chest and impales you, and you're like, oh, all right, okay.
Yeah.
Or
Should have
like
seen it go.
those basilisks, goddamn basilisks. And
Oh my
one,
God.
Souls.
Ugh.
You're like, oh, that thing looks like it's just gonna leap at me and attack me. You're like, and I'm cursed. Okay, good.
Good times.
Well, being cursed can't be that bad. I'll just die, and then
And then you have half your HP upon waking up.
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
You're
like,
oh,
oh, good.
there
Now
is
I'm more likely to
consequences.
die and get cursed.
Yep.
The cycle will repeat itself.
Vicious cycle.
Good times.
Well, I have a couple more examples of games that are lacking in atmosphere but are otherwise good games. One of them, it's I wouldn't say it's a stretch, but there are definitely a lot of things that help overcome this. But I'd say Skyrim's atmosphere could use a bit of work for a lot of the reasons
I
that
can agree.
mentioned
I can
before.
agree.
It obviously has the visuals. It obviously has the music. And when you're just kind of existing in the world, when you're just kind of sitting at the Bannered Mare or in your home, it's flawless. It's when you start interacting with the game's mechanics that it all kind of falls apart.
I was an adventurer like you before I took an arrow in the
Yeah.
knee.
The classic.
And another one that I think is even more egregious, that kind of goes back to what you were saying about Final Fantasy 15 with like, cardboard cutouts of people and meaningless buildings and villages. Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk is the Truman Show of video games.
Oh boy,
And
yeah.
you cannot have less of an atmosphere once you realize that. And to me, I think that's part of one of the reasons why I didn't fall in love with it. I mean, there are many reasons, but which we went into 3 months ago. But one of them is
Jeez,
like,
time flies.
yeah, because a lot of games, like, if you play a lot and you look behind the hood and such, you'll eventually break some aspects of its immersion and believability because it is still a game. But very few games that are good or have good atmosphere ever kind of just have that happen, even in the most casual of ways of playing. You just need to play Cyberpunk for more than a handful of hours to realize that, like, there is no atmosphere in this game. It's got an incredible art design, so it's got that part down, But kind of thinking about all the things we kind of listed important to atmosphere, I think that's the only one it nails. Maybe the soundtrack I'd put up there if we could actually listen to the soundtrack outside of a car.
Yeah, that was a little strange.
That was very jarring.
Why was there not a fucking radio app to stick in my brain?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. I didn't even think about that until just now. Actually, that
Yeah.
you're mentioning, it. I'm like, yeah, that's a good point. Even like Saints Row does that, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those two and Dark Souls 2 would be my biggest examples of good games that don't quite nail the atmosphere or, and by extension, the immersion. For, I think, different reasons for all of them, but I think they all apply. All right. Who hasn't answered yet? Because I can never keep track. I know Julian, Louis did, right? Because you said Dark Souls 2.
Yeah.
I know, Julian, you kind of gave your criteria, but I don't know if you actually gave an answer.
I said Final Fantasy 15.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. And so I guess...
No,
Dan?
I can kind of agree with that, having gone through FF15. Like, I liked a lot about what it did, but it always kind of felt hollow, a little bit empty. And I guess I guess on that note, I'd almost give it to Origami King. Because in many ways that game does have atmosphere, like it's this amazing, huge world. And like there are little secrets kind of tucked in every corner. It looks very, but I don't know. I feel like it kind of lost the soul that its predecessors had. Maybe because if they did that thing that people like to do, where they just throw a lot of bloom in the game, and like it looks very pretty, but I mean that was kind of the appeal about Paper Mario initially, was that it wasn't like the most amazing looking game. It had a very cute paper aesthetic, and it was an aesthetic, not this literal interpretation that they made it into, where like you are like the characters acknowledge that they are paper and whatnot, and like the whole thing is that people are getting folded up into origami shapes, so it's like they're going hard into it, and it's just I don't know. It's almost like they're beating the player over the head with it at this point. So I'd hate to say it about a game that I generally enjoyed, but yeah, I'm gonna have to give it to Paper Mario and the Origami King.
All right. Cool. Anyone else have any other mentions they'd like to mention? Or shall we progress in our discussion?
Progression.
That.
No, I don't think I can think of more games.
Yeah, I think we covered it.
We've nailed a lot
swath.
of. I actually no. I'm gonna give another one,
Liar.
and I'm kind of gonna write off the Final Fantasy 15 thing and add that Final Fantasy 13 started it. Final Fantasy 13 is perhaps the antithesis of what I think about when I think of atmosphere in a game. It's just like Final Fantasy 10 evolved around a corridor, but the story had so much feel to it, and the characters were all so good that at least there was that, and the soundtrack was great. But then you get to Final Fantasy 13, and I feel like 13 tried to recapture something similar, and it fails so hard. It's kind of pathetic. But yeah, that's my second hot take, I guess.
I don't know how hot a take is. I don't know
don't
Final
think it
Fantasy
is
that very
very
well,
hot a
but 13 is pretty universally blasted.
Yeah.
No, it's not a very hot take.
Hallway Simulator.
I mean, they were doomed from the start. It's 13, everyone knows that's an unlucky number. Okay. Just trying to think if there's any other. I don't think so. I think we did a good covering of good games lacking atmosphere. Although I don't know if you consider Final Fantasy 13 a good game.
It had
Atmosphere-
good things going for itself. It just shit the bed on executing on a lot of
Yeah.
it.
Okay. All right. Well, if anyone has any other atmosphere-related topics or questions, by all means, share. Just trying to think myself if I have anything else to bring up atmosphere-related. Okay, well, I mean, this may be more like a recap question if nothing else, but what is it about a game with good atmosphere, or like when's the eureka moment when you're like, wow, this game's atmosphere is like what's the catalyst moment for you? And you could give a specific example of a game where, okay, now I see how powerful this atmosphere is, or whatever, or what's the feeling a new game gives you when you feel like, okay, you're about to go into a real atmospheric experience?
I have a good answer for that actually. If it's not what you're expecting, I guarantee it's not what you're thinking here. But strangely enough, I think the games that impact me the most with their atmosphere, only the moment that I realize it is when I'm nostalgic for it. It's a really weird thing to say. Like I feel something when I'm playing it, but it's almost like subconscious. Like I feel like something a little different, but I can't quite put my finger on it. I'm motivated to keep playing it, and then when I remember it, I think of it in a certain way. Like the image that comes to mind when I think of a game, like Silent Hill, I see like the foggy streets of that town, and like I remember the feeling I felt, like the dread of going through a corner, going through a door, hoping that there wouldn't be a monster there that would hurt me when I'm so close to death. Or maybe it's the Resident Evil 4 village that comes to mind. I see it like so clearly in my head, like that, those colors, those like autumn brown colors. And like again, the feeling associated with it. It's the feelings that I get when I remember it. That's how I know that it achieved good atmosphere.
Okay.
It's hard to say when, like, while I'm playing it, if that feeling happens. Like if I would realize right away. Like sometimes there's like wow moments, of course. Like you're playing a game and there's like a big like whoa, that's so cool. Like Nier Automata has like a billion of those.
Yeah.
So you get like a moment and you're like, whoa, that's really clever. Like that's so immersive. But you might know, like sometimes I play a game and I'm like, I feel like this will be something I'll be nostalgic for, or I'll remember this game, I'm sure. But it's rare that I can know ahead of time that it will be a game that I appreciated the atmosphere that much. Because usually there's like a standard of atmosphere, but if it makes me nostalgic for it, then that's like the surefire sign that like, yeah, that was some damn good atmosphere, that I can remember the feeling of that game.
Yeah, no, I agree with what you're saying, and I think for me, it's actually very similar, except at least when it really like hits it out of the park. Like I know this was the case for Witcher 1 when I first played it. It's the same idea of that nostalgia feeling, but for me, when it's it's not every case, but when it's really like top tier, I get that feeling while I'm still playing, before I even finish the game.
Wow.
Like
Being
for me,
nostalgic for a new game.
Yeah.
Okay.
For me, that kind of, I don't even. It gets this. It's a similar feeling, nostalgia. I guess the other way to describe it is like feeling like you're home in a game.
Damn.
And that's something I got during this chapter the first time I played through this game. And so that for me, it's not to say games where that doesn't happen aren't atmospheric, because that's really like, I'm talking like the top tier here. And there's definitely some where I can kind of reflect back on afterwards, like you do. But for the top ones, it happens in the moment. I get that nostalgia or that, self-awareness. It's not quite the same with atmosphere, in regards to atmosphere, but I had a very similar thing when I was playing The Witcher 3. There was a point where I was like on Skellige, and it just kind of dawned on me that I was like, this is probably the best game I've ever played, and that was like 30 hours before beating it, at least, if not more. So yeah, it's kind of like a mix of nostalgia before it ends, or a feeling of being home, or being somewhere that's as welcoming as a home. Because if a game doesn't have a top tier atmosphere, it's never going to accomplish that for me. Another game that does that for me, or one of the reasons why I really like CRPGs, is just because like the style of it, both visually and with the music, and just going through like, virtually, but like there's books like with all the stats and the rules, and it's hard to describe, but it's like this feeling of nostalgia and hominess that really sets it apart. but there are plenty of example like Skyrim, even even with its flaws in hindsight, in the moment has a very similar impact on me, and I think a lot of people, which is why is what it is. It's just in that case it kind of falls apart under greater scrutiny, whereas games like The Witcher and some other examples, like even after you go back and you're like, wow, was it really as impactful as I remember it being? And you're like, yeah, it was. Whereas Skyrim, it's like I still love the feeling and cherish the memory, but it's like I can see past the the facade now. So yeah, and another example or another indicator of that is when I go back to the games, and I feel that like a bit now too with Witcher, but especially like when I played Half-Life the other week. Holy moly, it was like I was feeling things I hadn't felt in a while,
Oh, of course.
and that's always a good sign as well. And when you can really look at a game, and I guess this applies not just to Atmosphere, but just how much you love a game in general, and you can, with as much confidence in yourself as you can, take off the rose-tinted glasses and still believe that it is as good as you feel it is, which is a hard thing to do, but with something like Half-Life, I'm able to like look at that, and it also helps when you're talking about games that are well loved and a lot of people feel this way for, but yeah, if you can as best you can remove the rose-tinted glasses also and look back on it fondly, then that's another key sign for me that this game's atmosphere sucked me in. So yeah, that's my answer. So I think both Louis and Dan, or one of you's,
Man,
next.
it's a tough question.
It is.
It's a tough question.
No denying that.
So, when do I know that I've reached critical mass?
Basically.
I don't know, man. It's a feeling that's hard to describe for me, and I mean,
Yeah.
because at this point it's like it's a like bizarre like feeling that I get somewhere just a little behind my eyes. Like I almost want to compare it to like the laughable like ASMR tingle, where it's just like there's something there, and I can feel my own ideas kind of going crazy about like self-insert characters, and like I was someone like back in my teenage years, I would write a lot of fanfic about the games I enjoyed. So I was like, when I start feeling creative about the world that I'm being presented, I feel like there's a synchronicity that develops, and that's when I know that like I'm striking something that was good. When I start thinking in like beyond the game and start actually engaging with the feeling,
Yeah.
I guess is the best way I can put it.
That's good.
So it's often going to express like later down the line as a bit of a nostalgia,
Yeah.
or in a sense of like it was said before, like a sense of coming home when you play the game again. Like I played Bloodborne a little recently, and I was like, yeah.
Yeah, you just
Oh,
feel you just feel like you're in the right place,
Yeah. Like there's a bit of rust on the whole like mechanical of it, but in your head the headspace is already ready to go and like ready to go hard, and it
Yeah.
feels good. It just feels plain good. And
Yeah, it just feels right, when you're playing a game that, and again, it goes beyond atmosphere, but any game that has that impact on you, which for me a lot of time is because of atmosphere. When you're playing it just feels right. Like I'm playing Witcher right now. Everyone who's played Witcher, and even those who don't know, like the controls are meh, to say the least.
Yeah.
But even though I haven't played it in like probably at least 2 years now, like I'm already like all the way back in. Controls be damned.
controls be down.
And I'd argue they're not as bad as some people make them out to be, especially once you get used to them. But nevertheless, like another game example too is like KOTOR. Like combat system in KOTOR is meh. It's got good like class building options, but how combat usually plays out is, it doesn't really convey the depth its systems kind of try to make you think it has. But I don't care, because when I play it, I just feel like that same feeling. And controls be damned. Especially with older games where you have to, just accept the fact that they're going to play a little less intuitively than newer games. And if the games are that special that, atmospheric and all that, then it really shouldn't matter. At least for me. But I'm always, you know me, I'm narrative over, or everything over gameplay most of the time, so it makes sense for me.
Does fit your MO.
Yeah. Yeah, I think just Dan hasn't answered.
Yeah, so you're asking for the moment, like, really,
Like, when do you
I
know, like, or what's the feeling you feel when you know you're playing, like, a supremely atmospheric game or immersive game?
I mean, I have a little bit of trouble with this sometimes. I feel like I only really start to know that I got a winner, like, kind of at the end. Because there were a lot of games that I played that, like, I could start off really enjoying, and then by the end of it, like, either the mechanics have kind of drawn on me, or like, I just kind of get bored of the aesthetic. It's closer to the end. If I can beat a game and then think about it for a second time, think about going through a second playthrough, that's kind of the only time I could really know if it's amazing or not. I mean, there are some that are obvious, you know, like when I first played Mass Effect 1, I knew from the start, like, I was going to like this game. Recently, I started playing Valkyria Chronicles.
The title screen of Mass Effect.
The first note
so
of the first song on the Mass Effect title screen, and I was like, I'm in.
Note is just so perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a series like I'm surprised no one's mentioned in atmospheric conversation, because as far as sci-fi atmosphere goes, it doesn't really get better than that. I know for you, Louis, it's, you know, not your bread and butter, so I wasn't.
Oh, and I knew right away it's not my bread and butter, but there was something about that introduction that I was like, okay, I see what you got there. I see what you're going for there. And the more I played, the more I was like, this is just perfect. This is genius.
Yeah. Perfect argument in favor of soundtrack being one of, if not the most important aspects in atmosphere, because it's literally the title screen is drawing you in because of the music. You know, very few games, even games with superb soundtracks, can do that quickly, you know? Like Doom Eternal's menu screen music is fucking awesome, but it's not like an immediate like hook the way Mass Effect's is. So yeah. Yeah, I also agree with the whole like wanting to play it again right away. Like, I played The Witcher 1 and 2 twice each, back to back to back to back, in a span of maybe like a month and a half. And, you know, like Exhibit A of like exactly what you were saying, like, and that wasn't a game that necessarily gripped me right away, because it took me like 3 tries to get into it. But by the time I got to this chapter and then to the end, solidified it, and I was like, well, let's go play 2, and then let's come back and play this again, and then play 2 again, and then play them all again before 3. And that's pretty much what I did.
Yeah, basically.
Oh, another good example, at least for me, because how much I like world building and lore and stuff. If I seek out of game information or books, like I have the first 3 Mass Effect novels that came out, I have a Dragon Age novel, I have Star Wars novels, I read all the Witcher books, and those I'd even just get by like actual books, because when I goes into it, this is how I knew how committed I was to it, is like they weren't released in English yet. I read poorly fans translated PDF copies online.
That's
jeez.
And I didn't even give a shit. I haven't even read I have all the books now. I haven't even read them through all again, like, properly. Like, I was just sitting there on my computer, like, after I played them both through 2 times, and I'm just like, all right, I got a year till Witcher 3. Here we go. And, you know, like, that was one of the telltale signs for me of BioWare games, is like, I always did that, like I said, with Dragon Age, Mass Effect, Star Wars. Yeah. So that's also, like, to me, like, a good sign that, like, okay, this game certainly did something right. And even in game, like a lot of games, especially like Pillars and Pathfinder, have a lot of lore that you can read up about the various countries and religions and gods and stuff. And same idea, like when I see myself like taking the time to sit down and just read that stuff, when it's completely unnecessary for the game itself, that's when you know like the world has gripped me. That's one of the reasons I love Pillars, is because its world was just like right up my fantasy alley.
Mm-hmm.
And Pathfinder is too, although it's not quite on the same level as Pillars yet as far as its world building, at least not yet, at least for me. But I still like every time there's a dialogue option that comes up and there's a highlighted city or a place, I always read that little thing to get an idea of what this place is like, what this world is like.
What am I getting myself into?
Yeah, because I love to absorb all that stuff, especially in a game where like it can reward you for knowing some of that obscure information. Maybe not like directly, but just like you have a decision in front of you. You're like, wow, I read about these people and I know they're like this, so this is going to kind of influence about how I decide to deal with a situation. You know. And I think that's another thing. I don't like kind of touched on parts of it, but we never like said the word. And I think a big part of immersion and atmosphere is world building, not just in like, okay, where is this dungeon in relation to this dungeon and so on and so forth. So I mean, like the lore of the world, the stories behind the world, like, and just it kind of goes hand in hand with making a believable world that doesn't revolve around you. And if you have good world building with lore and interesting historical events that influence the current state of things and all that, and the world reflects it, like it just takes it up another notch. That's one of the things. Like Morrowind to me has the best world building of any Elder Scrolls game, because that design philosophy was always, and you could see it in like all its mechanics and all its systems. It's like we're making this world and then the player comes in. It's not like we have this player and we're going to build this world for him. And a lot of that, it's not just about dungeon design or UI and all that. It's also just how the world is put together as well, how much emphasis is put on everything else that's going on, which can create a sense of like the world goes on without you. The world doesn't revolve around you. Whereas games that have a poor lore built together and stuff like can kind of crumble, and you realize, okay, this is literally just a virtual playground for me, as opposed to a living, breathing world that I'm a part of.
So I'm gonna kind of meet you halfway on that, where I obviously love exactly that, where like you feel like there's this world that exists without you and such. Where I'm gonna diverge a little bit is I know that you like to read a lot. You like to read a lot of codex entries, et cetera, et cetera. I've always been the kind of person I feel like you can show a lot more than you can do by just telling. I've never been one to like dive deep into codex lore, because I prefer to learn about the world organically through playing through the game. Like you were saying earlier, like, yeah, video games it's an interactive medium. And if I'm just being told what's happening through like, just fucking walls and walls of dialogue, I don't feel like I'm even part of the world, really. Like I have to matter a little bit. Otherwise, why am I here? Why did my character decide to become an adventurer and do all this jazz?
Well, usually games have answers to that. Or you come up with it yourself, if we're talking like Skyrim and such.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there are definitely some games which kind of expect more of the player in that sense. I don't know. I prefer that the game show me the lore of the world instead of tell me.
Well, what do you mean by
show,
that?
Don't tell is an age-old rule of like cinema and TV and.
Yeah. Instead of telling me through a codex entry that this city is like, there's like this huge racial tension between the Zoblamites and the Gleforkians. Instead of like having me read about that, let me see that. Let me show me this stuff.
I'd argue the good games with good world building do that. Codex entries, I'm not saying they should be where all the information is. Codex entries are just to flesh out and give you more information if it is what you desire. Like I agree, like you shouldn't have to open a codex entry to know why there's a racial conflict in this town. But if you want to know more about the basis and the origins of that racial conflict, then it's there. And a lot of times these codex entries unlock after discussions or uncovering items and stuff. So it's still coming through the world, it's just neatly organized and placed there for you.
Yeah, and like, I understand that serves a purpose and whatnot, but I would prefer that they have a bigger focus on showing you what's going on. Like, say what you will about Dark Souls. I think it was a very interesting method that they used. Like, explaining lore through item dialogue or through flavor text, basically. At the same time, though, I kind of would have almost liked to have been there for some of these events. I would have kind of liked to have seen things happen, be part of the legend. You know,
Well, that would be a
like
different
that's-
game, though. A game can't have
Right.
every single moment in its world in its game, you know?
No, of course. That's not what I'm asking for. I'm just saying maybe have more showing than telling. Give me less codex entries and more gameplay. Have my decisions matter more, you know?
Well,
That
what's a
kind of
game
thing.
where you feel like that does that? What's a game that you... Give me an example of what you're telling me.
They don't exist.
No, like, of what you're saying these games do. Like, give me an example of something you would have rather have
Well,
seen.
Morrowind, for example. I feel like
Morrowind doesn't have a
obviously,
codex.
like, what's up?
Morrowind doesn't have a codex.
No, but the way that you deal with people and the way that like dialogue works out and everything, like I understand that it was obviously like limited by its by the technology at the time. They couldn't voice every line and such, but I feel like by having all this reading and whatnot, I often found myself just kind of skipping through it to get to the next plot point, because like there could be too much. Very easily, you can like just be telling too much, and you know, I feel like it starts to fall apart as a game at that point. Whereas something like Morrowind kind of found like an interesting balance where there is a lot of books, there's a lot of Morrowind, Oblivion, where Oblivion finds a nice balance. Where I mean, you know, like some people kind of get iffy about like you are the hero Kvatch and whatnot, and like you are centered in the story. But at the same time, I feel like that's why people play games, is to kind of feel like they matter a bit more in the world, because it's really easy to feel insignificant.
Well, I think it's less that there's games out like Morrowind makes you feel insignificant. It starts you that way because you're a nobody off a boat. But that's kind of the whole point about progression systems, and the whole argument about the world not revolving around you is not the idea that you're never important. It's that the idea you have to earn the importance and actually progress through the game systems. Like by the end of Morrowind, you are more powerful than the Dragonborn or the hero Kvatch. Like you are a literal floating god of death if you want to be, but you have to earn it. Whereas in Oblivion and in Skyrim and in these other more classical heroic tales, you don't earn it. You're just, oh, you almost got executed, but now you're the only person who can defeat the dragon threat. Like, and now suddenly you're, you know, the hero, and like, but you've done nothing. You can still get absolutely slaughtered by a bandit on the road. Whereas the games that are really good are the ones that still give you that sense of importance, but you earn it. You know, like even with KOTOR, like you're just some chum bum whatever Republic soldier as far as you know at the beginning, and then at the end when you become who you really are and you're this powerful Jedi or Sith, like you've earned that. You've progressed through the story to get to that point, and you've progressed through your leveling to get to that point.
Well, yeah, of course.
The problem
I'm not saying
isn't
start
being
game
the
as a
hero. The
I'm just saying
problem-
let me matter a bit more in the world, in terms of like let me experience some of the lore bits that you're saying and not just have me read it all.
Well, I
If
can
wanna
tell
like,
you
lore
for
book, I'll
Morrowind,
pick up a book. But if I
Morrowind
wanna
does
play a video
exactly
game,
that.
I'll experience the game.
Morrowind does a lot of the things you read about Morrowind, you directly impact later in the game. Like
Alright.
including godlike figures, and that's what I'm saying. Like games that do this right do exactly what I feel like you're asking for. You're just like you just have to get there. It just doesn't start that way. And I feel like that's a better game design because you feel more sense of progression and more sense of having earned your place at the top of, you know, whatever ladder you climb in the game. You know, even games that start off well, like, can still do things that make you have to earn your place. Like, for example, Mass Effect. You become a Spectre, like, almost immediately, right? But it's not like, oh, suddenly you're just the guy. Like, you're still very much, like, discriminated against and looked down upon by non-humans and all the, like, it's a huge theme of the entire franchise until, like, the third game. But you know, like even in games like that where it does give it to you right away, it still makes it like you still have to, okay, you've been given the title, but now prove you deserve it, you know?
Yeah,
And
of course.
that's while Mass Effect kind of, at least for me, sidesteps that. But I'm trying to think of, but in a game where it's like Skyrim, like You don't progress to get to that point. You don't have to do anything to prove your worth at that point. Everyone just sucks your dick and calls you Dragonborn after the first mission.
What do you want, Witcher? I've been looking
Same time, it's like it's inconsistent because they equally don't care about you throughout.
Exactly.
the game,
It's all
you
about
know?
consistency and realism. Like, I completely agree. Wanting to feel important is important, especially in a lot of games. Like, I love the classic good versus evil as much as anybody. But like, there are ways to go about it that are better than just saying, you're the guy, here's all your powers, enjoy being a Mary Sue and have fun, as opposed to like actually having to earn that you know, that status in the world.
Mhm.
Yeah, I can go back to another reason why Skyrim's atmosphere and immersion breaks a bit is because of that too. Whereas Morrowind is you got a near perfect progression as far as both your social status in the world as well as your power level relative to the world around you. You know, it's like it goes back to like why I hate, or one of the reasons I hate like a lot of modern movies and stories where like the main character is like it goes back to like Rey beating Kylo Ren in Episode 7. Like that to me narratively destroys everything. Because like what are you doing at that point? You've already won. You know, like you've already accomplished everything you needed to accomplish. Like, okay, she didn't kill him, but like there's no tension. There's no belief that she's gonna lose now because she's already won. Whereas in other games where you start off weak or whatever, or have a fight against the boss where he whoops your ass,
Or Rogue One. You think of Rogue
yeah,
One.
or Rogue One, which is you know the best Disney Star Wars movie, probably in no small part because of that.
Actually, it's my overall favorite Star Wars movie too. Funny
Damn.
enough, I'm brave enough to say it.
It's a bold statement,
Say
but
that.
I can see why.
Rogue One was a great movie.
Yeah.
It just subverts your expectations of power and protagonist.
Yeah.
Really well. I think.
Yeah. Whereas the main trilogy does the opposite. It's just like she's the hero. Why? Cause, and that's all. That's it.
Because
Just
And,
cause.
and whether it's games, movies, books, or anything, I hate that. Because like, what do you mean just cause? Like, no, I want to earn my kingdom. I want to feel like I, like even something like maybe simpler, like let's say Pathfinder, where the hook going in, like you're gonna get a barony, you're gonna rule. It happens fairly quick in the game, but you still have to go through an entire act of the game where you are ousting the current ruler. So you earn your barony. It's not just like, okay, start of the game, you made a character, you're now barony of this, go. Like, to me, the game would be infinitely worse if that's the approach they took.
I get that. I do. Same thing with like Assassin's Creed 2. When you get given the villa, like it's not right away. I mean, you're not like king or anything, but it's like it's also honestly there's another aspect to that. I think it just generally when it comes to design, I feel like if you space out interesting aspects and rewards to the player, you can keep them hooked longer. Like think about like if you're giving something cool like in Pathfinder, if you're giving that like I don't know what do you call it? Like it's not a castle. It's a what was the name of it?
Well, it's a barony. You have a barony. And you have your capital and such. But yeah, you have a barony.
So like aside from feeling more powerful, it's also spacing out cool things for you to enjoy in the game, rather than just shoving all the powers to you at once in the beginning. It's like that's like you'll get like the goat simulator effect. It's like this game's wacky and fun, whoa, and then it's just like okay, well, I mean, I'm kind of done now. Like you do it. It's wacky, it's fun, but then it's like a toy. It's like you play it with it, and it's like, well, now it's lost its novelty, and now there's nothing left. Whereas if you space out narratively the power that the protagonist will get, not only is it better narratively and for your fantasy as the player, but also just in terms of hooking you in, like inch by inch, getting like, oh, now you could shoot lightning out of your hands. You're like, what? I could shoot lightning? And then like halfway through the game, you could fly. You're like, I can fly now? You're like, oh my god, this game's awesome. And then you can approach things differently rather than just, okay, you can fly, you can shoot lightning, you own a barony, and you're god. So
yeah, like if every moment of the game is you just being a badass hero, then it's boring. It's like how they say, if everything is special, nothing is special.
Exactly.
If every day is Christmas, then who's going to give a fuck about Christmas anymore? You know?
Yep. 100%.
Fine. Play tough. As that old stooge Vesemir used to say, let's fight and see. I can hear them.
I'm gonna jump to Dan's defense a little bit though,
Sure.
because I agree with him that I'm falling a bit like in between, where I like that there's a codex if I want to refer to it. Like in the Mass Effect universe, the way I thought of it was like, if there was something about one of the alien races I didn't understand, then I can imagine that there's like some sort of like space Google that Shepard could consult
Yeah.
to like
Well, yeah,
to, like,
that's yeah.
kind of solidify like his knowledge. But at the same time, I find that a lot of games, especially lately, have made themselves guilty of like, rather than showing or explaining in a way that makes sense, they just cop out, like kind of like how Valhalla did it, where they just cop out of explaining it altogether by just like, oh, you'll find this random note that some random guy wrote about what's happening, and then if you pick it up and read it, that's good. If you don't, well, too bad. You'll miss that little tidbit of lore, I guess. But I don't like, and this is where I agree with Dan, I don't like that to get the full context of something that's happening, I have to peruse through like God knows how many codex entries or find the appropriate book scattered somewhere in the universe. I like the idea of things being like as plain text as possible.
There's something to be said about delivering your story in a more linear fashion than to just like break it up. And yeah, you got like 1,000 little bits of entries, and like that, it can certainly benefit a story. I'll look at a game like BioShock, where all the journal entries, the voice entries, that's great because that's kind of marrying the best of both worlds. You're giving me an interactive way that the story is telling me what's happening, while also like having it not interrupt gameplay, as well as, you know, kind of give a little bit more insight into the characters that are going through this situation. Let me experience the situation for what it is instead of reading about it from a historian's perspective.
The non-intrusive aspect of it is what makes it so much better. As opposed to, I think, to go off what you're saying, a game that recently put me in that position was Outer Worlds, where there's a tremendous amount of note pickups and codex entries. And I found that they would interfere a little too much. Like, I love lore, by the way. I read lore in games. But I felt like it was just too much. I feel the same thing, actually, funny enough, in Fallout games on computer terminals. Because I'm like, I don't really want to, like, I want to go explore now. I don't really want to just read everything that happened here on a terminal. I want to go and play the game. The perfect balance to me is Dead Space / BioShock audio logs. Because you have to think there's this perfect balance of budget in games, right? Like, it's expensive to make a cutscene or make like a character actually have to, or it interrupts the story to have an actual cutscene. But to have like someone who left behind a diary entry, it was verbally saying a diary entry could be really cool, like to play while you're still playing. If you're thinking fantasy games, yeah, the technology doesn't exist in the world to do something like that, but there's a million ways you could do it interestingly.
Yeah.
Pillars of Eternity, your character can read minds. So if your character can read minds, maybe there's some logical way that they can have like a remnant or something that plays from someone's memory while you're walking around. Like, there's cool ways to make it fit the world. And I think that it really benefits the narrative and gameplay to have it not make you stop in your tracks and read 3+ paragraphs.
Yeah.
Gamers tend to be too impatient for that anyway.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not saying that's not what I'm defending. Like, obviously, if it's over the top codex entries, it's bad, and I argue that the story should at least be understandable and completable without codex entries. And most of the time, codex entries are just like a few extra details on something you got from a piece of dialogue to begin with. So yeah, if there's a game where it's like you're just completely in the dark if you don't read the codex, then yeah, I completely agree. But I also feel like a codex is very important to world building because like there's only so much you can put through like cinematic dialogue or even audio logs before that has the same problem. The idea of the codex is that it's there if you want it. It's not if a game is designed, and I'm trying to think of one that maybe is like that. where it's like if you don't read the codex entries, you're fucked. Then I agree that that's not good game design. That's not good world building. It's more like, oh, this was an interesting little story. This guy, my companion, told me about this war in this village, and now I have a codex entry that can give me a bit more information. Like that. That's what I mean
great.
by a good codex. Not
Witcher has a pretty good one.
Yeah.
Witcher has a pretty decent codex, or Dragon Age Origins. Also.
Yeah. Mass Effect is an amazing codex.
Oh yeah, Mass Effect is like the standard, the industry standard for
Yeah.
great in-game
And fully
encyclopedia.
voiced too, for those of you who don't like to read.
Yeah, no, nothing too.
Not the secondary ones. But that's
Okay,
fine.
that's true. But the main
I'm
ones,
not
yeah.
complaining. Yeah.
Yeah.
I listened to them all. Like I even read all the secondary entries, but I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know
same.
how much got stuck in my head, but like I definitely went through the whole thing. So it was so interesting, and that's another thing. Like if you could make it engaging, and even have images, like a screenshot, just put in there.
Yep.
Like in Mass Effect, they have like an image at least, so you have something to look at. You're like, oh, okay, that's what that is. Like describing the Volus. So like, oh, why do they have the masks? Why are they in the suits? Like,
Yeah,
oh,
like it's
okay, I
just
get it
for
now.
it's for the little details that like, and also things that like, I think it works well like for things that are maybe would be considered common knowledge in the world. So it'd be like, oh, why are you asking about this Volus mask? Like everyone knows Volus wears masks because of this reason, you know. But if you're not aware, that's where the codex comes in, you know.
Yeah.
Because not everything the codex explains makes sense to be explained in the story, because the codex is like you got to see it as more like your knowledge of the world that kind of you should have just because you live in the world, which gamers need because we don't actually live in the world.
It's the link
know?
between you and the character you're playing as, I guess.
Yeah. But there are definitely like one thing I hate is all those fucking little shards you have to read in Cyberpunk after
Oh my god.
like, those are
how
awful.
tedious is
Yeah.
that yet?
like I read everything. I stopped reading those. Whereas Witcher
there's
3
too
had
many.
similar things, but they were much more spaced out and much more impactful to what was going on, as opposed to just like, I got some drugs, let's go do some blow, and like, okay, I just killed these guys, cool. Like, yeah.
I feel bad for the writing team. I'm just thinking like how many. I was looking at it, I'm like, there's so many. I'm like, how many did they have to write here? I'm like, it's too much. It's like,
Yeah.
like it's just every situation requires a shard with a conversation. Every single skull on the map, every bat on the map, or the NCPD things, they need to have a shard, at least one shard. There could be more.
Yeah.
And it gets to be like it's not viable to have
No.
the player read all of them. Like it's just not.
It's tedious.
It's not
and-
fun. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
You know, you have to. I think it's pretty arguable that most games you got to have fun while you're playing it. Some kind of
At least it's
enjoyment.
optional.
You know.
At least it's optional. I'll say like you don't have to read them, but like
Yeah.
you
But that's
need them
definitely a
usually
bad
to-
design on their part, and it's a shame because they did such a good job of doing the exact opposite, of not overwhelming you in The Witcher. Still had the codex, but like you could just easily like find a fraction of those kinds of notes, and they're much more impactful. They much more tell the story of where you are as opposed to just this random schmuck whose head you blew off.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just disappear for a second because I gotta pee.
Okay.
Gotta pee.
Every once in a while, I look back at your stream, Jacob, and I see you fighting more and more upsetting things.
Yeah, these are just wraiths and vampires that are kicking my ass because this is on hard, and I don't think I can change the difficulty.
Nah, that's sounds like an old school game thing.
Yep. I don't mind. Like, if I just took the time to remember how this build worked, I'd be fine. I'm not going to do that now because, well, we're going to be done soon, and I don't know when I'll play again. I'll probably restart anyways because, like I said, I started this playthrough like years ago. Man, I'm going to leave here because I don't want to keep dying. So yeah, well, I think this whole conversation was just about world building to start. So my point is, good world building is important.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Good world building goes a long way.
And yeah, there's definitely some games and like Cyberpunk that get a little heavy-handed with it. But I think the best games strike that balance between show and tell, because there's only so much you can show, and there's just things you can tell that aren't really worth showing. You know, like you want a quest where you uncover the dimensions of a Volus penis. Like, I mean, if that's what you want.
What?
That's a word to come back to.
Yeah.
Oh, hold on.
No, I was just kind of recapping like what we were saying, world building and such, and like, you know, like some things you want to show and other things you want to tell. Because like, okay, you want to learn about the, you know, the dimensions of a Volus penis. That's what the Codex is for. No one wants to play a quest where you go through that, do they? Or maybe
Okay,
maybe in the case of a penis, if you're into it. But like, I don't need a quest to tell me that Krogan are 8 feet tall.
The Volus penis.
Is there really Volus penis information?
No,
I honestly
no.
wouldn't be okay. I wouldn't be surprised if there was.
No, but
There
maybe more realistic is like, I don't need a quest to tell me that Krogan are big.
Oh, okay.
You know? Because we know. And you can see it visually, and if you want actual measurements, then the Codex.
What about Krogan penis?
Don't they have like 2?
They have
or-
Four heads, yeah.
They have multiple.
Oh, so clearly there is information. On
There
Krogan
is.
Penis.
Yes.
100%.
Krogan penis,
Oh,
yes.
okay.
Volus, not so much. Krogan penis, yes. They have like 4 testicles.
They have 2 hearts. They have spare of just about every organ you can think of.
Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah.
So resilient, like they're like
Yeah.
tanks. Like they have spare organs to keep them alive. Okay.
Yeah, and
More
it's
testicles.
yeah.
And no way to reproduce. Wow, it's tragic.
They have
man.
they have the genophage.
yeah.
Exactly.
And it's, you know, that's the kind of stuff that where a codex thrives. Because a game without a codex or without, like, there's no way they're going to put all that kind of ultimately mundane information in the actual narrative. Because it just, you know, doesn't, it may be hard to come up with a
Doesn't
quest
serve the
where
story,
the amount of
yeah.
testicles a Krogan has is the selling point of the quest, you know?
I'll kick you in your 4 balls.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm
Shepard,
not kicking
can
the
you help me
balls,
scratch my
like one.
balls?
Yeah. Okay. So I feel like we're, you know, getting to the end. So how about to wrap it up, we'll do a nice little conclusion. So why don't everybody just kind of quick recap of you know what a game needs for you to be a top tier atmosphere immersive experience. Like just kind of like a conclusion paragraph at the end of an essay kind of thing, just to
Sure.
wrap it up.
I'll go first because I usually just loaf to the end. Yeah, big good music that fit the world. Ideally some really nice graphics, story, and music, world building, obviously. Just organic ways to implement all of those features into a game, I think, really help with creating good atmosphere. Without having too much of any one of those things kind of take precedence. It's a blending pot, and you kind of have to have equal measure of everything. And more so than just equal measure, equal quality. And that's what I think.
Okay. Julian, putting you on the spot.
Yeah, that's fine. I pretty much said everything. I think Dan said a whole bunch of them too. But I think, like we mentioned earlier, art direction, I think, goes a long way in terms of coordinating the color schemes of different areas, the palettes, and how they reflect the mood and the feeling that they want the player to have. I think that the sound design and audio mixing and music all can reflect that and the overall emotion of the scene or of the level. And I I think that if all those things are in harmony, and like sure, just throw in UI, why the hell not? Literally, if the more the merrier, the more features that follow the same mood for that particular point in the game, or just the overall mood for the whole game as a whole. I think all that contributes to a strong atmosphere, and one that's most likely to keep me immersed.
All right. Louis, you ready to answer, or do you want to pass to last?
Yeah, I can give an answer.
Cool.
For me, atmosphere, the first thing you'll have to do is give me something to listen to. As much as games can be played on mute much easier than they can be played blindfolded, I'm someone who needs all of my senses to be engaged all at once, both in terms of liking what I see, matching what I see with what I hear, but also matching these two with what I feel. If you can get this trifecta, this little pyramid of power going, then you'll have a recipe for success, and you'll be able to sell me games that are outside of my comfort zone just because they feel so good.
Yeah, it's a good answer. For me, obviously, a lot of same. Like, music is usually the first thing that comes up, as we said with like Mass Effect and such. But to kind of just use different words, so we're not just all parroting each other. I'll put it a little differently. For me, because obviously it's like you were saying, Dan, you need a good balance of all these things. And for me, the evidence of that working and having this balance and thus creating a strong atmosphere, for me, ultimately comes down to, in its simplest terms, a believable world. And obviously, those things get enhanced by the visuals, the art design, and the music. And if those are lacking, then it doesn't quite hit the same notes. But if your world is not believable, whether it's because it's too gamey or just like, especially for an RPG, like the lore just makes no fucking sense, or something like that. Like, to me, the world needs to be believable, and especially on the immersive atmosphere front, it needs to not revolve around me. I need to be able to impact it and change it and influence it, but these need to be things that I do myself and not things that are just, here you go, here is generic world-changing decision one, make it. Like, it's like, no, you saved this bandit, but turns out he's an awful human being and then raped his daughter when he got home. Like, not that I want to hear about that necessarily, but I want more nuance to the world like that to really create that level of immersion. And yeah, I feel like I don't know if I'd go so far as to say it's the most important for the world to be real and believable, but it's a lot easier, at least over time, for me to lose the love of an atmosphere of a game once, like, the hood is removed, like I was talking about with Skyrim. Because Skyrim nails all the other things, graphics, sound design, music, but once you pull back the hood, it loses it. And for me, it's hard to regain that once it's lost in such a fundamental way. Whereas if, like, Skyrim was a perfect, super realistic world, but maybe the graphic design or art design wasn't quite there, I think it, long term, like, short term, I probably wouldn't have gotten into it as easily or as quickly or even at all. But long term, if I did get into it, it would be a more powerful atmosphere if the world felt real. So yeah, that's really what it comes down to is, music, art, all that. Like, it's super important to get the top tier ones, but to me, it almost doesn't matter if the world just is too gamey or too nonsensical, unless, like, that's the vibe that the game's going for, like a Borderlands or a Psychonauts kind of thing. But if we're talking, like, for a generic example, like a fantasy RPG, like, if the world doesn't feel real and doesn't feel like it exists without me, my immersion and atmosphere is broken almost immediately. Yeah, that's why, like, right. I'd argue Skyrim has all the pretty bits, but I would argue to my dying breath that Morrowind has a better atmosphere. And that's really what it comes down to, is that distinction between those two games for me. All right. Any other closing comments, or shall we wrap her up?
Wrap it up.
All right. Well then,
Be silly, folks. Wrap your willy.
yeah, do that.
That.
But also like, subscribe, follow, tweet, whatever tickles your dick, I guess, if we're talking about wrapping your willies.
Right.
But most importantly,
penis.
stay average.
Don't forget to wrap your bullet penis.
But no, most importantly, stay average. And bye.
Love it.
All right.
There you go.
Cool. Yeah, pretty well. Got into a nice.
That was a shorter video, eh? Like what?
A
A
little
little under
shorter.
3 hours.
Yeah, it's like 2.5.
Certainly shorter by our usual standard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's it's definitely not bad. If we can get them down to more concise but like more informative, I think that's I'll call that a win.
Yeah. I'm with you on that one.